not only would I say, and this would be a bold statement, but I would say I would challenge anyone to produce a source that they really feel is genuinely credible. And we can go through some of those right here. And then number two, I don't believe that it's even doctrinally congruent. And that is another huge contention. People are like, oh, it's just fine if he was. I think we actually walked through the doctrine.
Challenge accepted. Let's see what the hat has to say.
Some statements we know, like Isaac Hale did later say, yes, I did write that. So some of them I know are legit, but.
Find me a source. Hey Hannah, quick question. Can we use sources that you say are legit in the same video? It says drink some more coffee because this is going to be a long video.
NuanceHoe.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the NuanceHoe YouTube channel for part 2. So glad to see you back around here again. Thank you so much for joining me. Sometimes I go by NuanceHoe, sometimes I go by Kara Burrell. Very excited to continue this series on the proudly anti-intellectual faction of Mormonism that is alive and well today, led in part by Hannah Stoddard, who claimed emphatically that Joseph Smith was not a treasure digger, to the disagreement of the 50 slides I'm about to show you. So Hannah is the author of many different books. One such I have right here. It's called Faith Crisis, Volume 1, We Were Not Betrayed, Answering Did the LDS Church Lie by Hannah Stoddard and her father, James Stoddard. Author of Seer Stones versus Urim and Thummim, Book of Mormon Translation on Trial. She is the executive director of the Joseph Smith Foundation and producer or director of 7 documentary feature films. I became aware of Hannah Stoddard when I attended the Book of Mormon Evidence Conference. Actually, a little bit before that, my mom, she knew what I was doing for a living. She knew I was on Mormon Stories. And she's like, Kara, there is an alter ego of you that I like that's in the church. Daughter that my mother never had, Hannah Stoddard. If Midnight Mormons is the YouTube channel for just like the young hip kids who just like, we want to be able to be a little bit rad, like a little bit like cool, a little bit dangerous. We're not supposed to say Mormon at the prompting of our super cool, totally rad prophet, Russell Nelson. We're going to stay on the wild side and we're going to still call ourselves Midnight Mormons. So if they're like I want to be in the church, but I also want to have like an edge. Hannah Stoddard is like that. I want to be in the church, but I want to be a fundamentalist Mormon and not kiss a boy until my wedding day. So that's another thing that Hannah believes, side note. One of the documentary films that she worked on was Nephites in Europe and Hidden Bloodlines, the Grail and Lost Tribes of the Lands of the North.
Fascinating but little known facts that seem to indicate that Nephites went to Europe and that the Nephite remnant can be found a lot more widespread than just in America. It uses Nephites in Japan, Lamanites in Burma, episodes on Haggoth or Hagoth.
The Nephilim were the descendants of a prince called Nephi or Nephi.
In their sheepskins, like pygmies sitting around their fire kind of a thing, you know? That is the evolutionary worldview that we were all brainwashed in our textbooks with. No language, no education, just grunting and hunting with our bows and arrows, right? That is not supported by the historical record at all. The ancient world was very civilized. In some ways, it may have been more civilized at certain points than we are today. In fact, there's a quote from it's either Brigham Young or Heber C. Kimball, and they talked about how actually before the flood, their buildings and their architecture and their science was so far advanced to anything we have today. They said if they saw our buildings today, which of course they can from the spirit world, but if they saw our buildings today, they'd be like, you guys, like, you think that's cool? Like, okay, you guys are playing with your Legos here. Joseph Smith being a descendant of Lehi, and why that is very significant.
In addition to directing the Joseph Smith Foundation projects for over a decade, she's often invited to speak on various radio and video programs, helped direct her first feature film beginning at the age of 16. Little Joseph Smith herself, huh? She has worked as a history and literature teacher, graphic design artist. I know that I'm totally going to be destroying you over the course of the next hour on every single point that you have ever said in this book and on Midnight Mormons with undeniable facts and information. I'm just going straight for the facts here. You can't break every single rule of graphic design for the cover of your book and then put inside the book that you're a graphic design artist. Now listen, your book, I read the entire thing yesterday. I've almost reread the entire thing today. I actually loved it. And John Dehlin and I are going to do a response video to it in 2 more days, a full thing of this book. And I know that you like John Dehlin because as a reference to why certain historians can't be trusted, Lowry Nelson, you said John Dehlin, host of Mormon Stories and apostate, counts him as his favorite historian and hero. If you're going for like, you know who you can't trust because of gossip, this or that, this cover's not of God. I'll tell you that much. Hannah's research supports the writings and teachings of ancient and Latter-day Prophets. No wonder why she's my mom's wannabe adopted daughter. Hey, I ain't doing any of that except for the graphic design. Mom, have you seen my thumbnails? So I've known about Hannah Stoddard for a couple of years now, and she has all these same similar beliefs to Rod Meldrum, who I did this Mormon Stories recap response video to that I just uploaded a couple days ago. So that would be part 1 in explaining this wider view of Mormon fundamentalists, why they believe what they believe. But this book has honestly been a gigantic education. And so with Hannah kind of going on a more mainstream Mormon program on Midnight Mormons, I thought this was the perfect opportunity to highlight the ridiculousness of what she believes, what she purports, what her philosophies are. This entire cohort and clan of Rod Meldrum, the Firm Foundation, the Young Earth Creationists of Mormonism, the Traditionalists, as they call themselves, that pose themselves on opposition to the progressives, and that the progressives have taken over the church and be like, well, doesn't that mean it's in apostasy if it's... We'll get into that too. So with her being on Midnight Mormons and actually saying such an absurd thing to a mainstream audience, almost like to a mainstream Mormon audience almost, I thought this was the perfect opportunity to not only explain why she's wrong and why Joseph Smith absolutely was a treasure digger, and I will be going by her standards. And I just can't wait for you guys to see what I prepared. I've worked really, really hard on this for many days, read many books, collected many thoughts, and not only can I prove that Joseph Smith was a treasure digger by Hannah's own standards of proper sources. Cannot wait for you to show you guys what I found. So if you can see how much research I put into this, and it's been a lot, please consider tipping just a couple dollars a month. It's a recurring donation on Patreon or on my donor box, or just a one-time whatever you feel like on my Venmo. All of those links will be down below. So just small donations help make this sustainable so that I can keep doing this really important agent for Satan work. So Hannah was a recent guest on Midnight Mormons. And I would say this is probably the only episode of Midnight Mormons I've watched in its entirety and actually enjoyed for reasons that you'll see in a second. But right off the bat, I am very interested in understanding this Fundie clan of Mormons and their holding to this traditional narrative. I'm really glad that I read this entire book so that I could actually make this video to better explain where she's coming from and her points of view. Completely steelman her points of view. If you truly believe Joseph Smith was a prophet, and what he said and did and revealed, and he said, I have never done anything wrong. If you put that in your book and you say, there's some progressive historians out there that said he did something wrong. Now, let me tell you this. The progressive historian, he voted for FDR, the socialist, versus the other ones of ours who were all like, while we did have the United Order, let's just forget about that our own version of communism or whatever. Do you want to go with what the prophet said or what progressive historians who voted for FDR have to say? It's going to be fun to play along with her logical games in this book. So by one standard, she's going to explain you have to look at the sources. Who can you trust? Who can you trust? Just like Rod Meldrum said, that these affidavits that said Joseph Smith was a treasure digger were taken from people who did this, this, and this. Totally unclassy. Satanic, actually, perhaps. These people are tearing down the true church while we're trying to build it up. They work for Satan. We work for God. End of story. Black and white thinking always leads to the correct conclusion as long as you choose the white one. Okay. And then by the very same token, Brigham Young said this. He is the prophet, seer, and revelator. If that's what he said, that means that it's true. And if somebody says something, and if you guys dare bring up anything that has to do with him saying that the penalty for interracial sex is death on the spot, and that Black people will be servants in heaven, and that not a single Black person in the entire world will be allowed to have the priesthood until every single other lighter-skinned person gets it. So Hannah is the gold medalist of right-wing Mormon fundamentalist mental gymnastics. So I thought, what would make this video funner? I could go over quote after quote after quote in her book that explains that people inside the church, outside the church, people who have left the church, like me, are literally agents for Satan. You could think that somebody like Leonard Arrington, who was a longtime church historian, put in place by, I think, like Howard W. Hunter, that technically the mantle of discernment of who to call, the seers who are supposed to see the future of the church, technically you would think that if the people they were calling into these church historian positions, any kind of CES director positions, who are going to lead the next generation of Mormon historians, BYU students, you would think that in this system of Mormonism, as it is proposed to us, that these people would have a mantle. They'd be able to have some type of discernment to know what was coming if they put in the wrong people who voted for FDR. Like, let's get real. But as she explains in her book, Korihor and Alma. Korihor is an antichrist in the Book of Mormon. And we have known this since the beginning, that sometimes there are just false spirits that people like Leonard Arrington, longtime church historian, they think that they got a message that they need, that this is God's work, that this history needs to be told, this true history needs to be told. Sometimes there's false spirits. Sometimes people are possessed by the devil, even within the church. So Hannah comes from this world of this Mormon train of thought where if the prophet said that this is what the revelation is that they got, it's not that they never make mistakes. In the introduction to their book, they say how Joseph Smith taught that the Book of Mormon was the most correct book of any on earth. And then logically, that must follow. The prophet Mormon was the greatest historian to our knowledge. So note the characteristics of the Book of Mormon and its historians and the prophet Mormon. The Book of Mormon is not fiction because that's what Mormon said. So we cannot take into any account of any other historians who say that it needs to be nuanced and it might be not as ancient. That's the world getting in. If Mormon said, and if Joseph Smith said that's the most correct book, and this guy said that this isn't fiction, then it's not fiction. The Book of Mormon is a polemic, and proper history should likewise defend the faith. The Book of Mormon was not peer-reviewed, but rather written by the Spirit of God and reviewed by God. That's another big thing that comes up. Peer review, those are scholarly ways of the world. If the Book of Mormon didn't need to be peer-reviewed and needed to be revealed by God, that is the standard for what we should look for. I'm not even kidding. The Book of Mormon is a truly academic history, although academics would reject it. The prophet Mormon was not a professional historian, but his history was professional. Circular logic. Look it up, understand it, starting with the conclusion that this is the most correct book, and then working your way back is not logically sound. But as she continues to explain, logic is for the world. We have a higher law of the way that we're allowed to work in the world. We work by a higher law. The entire real point of Hannah Stoddard's work is to say that if you're feeling like this isn't logical or something right now, that is because you are taken by the ways of the world, and you need to be taken in a spirit of revelation. And if you just submit yourself to God and humble yourself to God, you have to prepare yourself. You have to be worthy of spiritual experiences that will tell you that it's true, because God's revelations will not come through any of the ways of the world, including logic. So the very brain that God gave you to decipher everything else about your normal life, to help you get a PhD, to help you write a book, to help you understand things, he wants you to suspend it in his system, is their entire point of this book, literally. One of many of Hannah's hilarious, I love this. Thank you, Mom, for this gift. This was my favorite book I've ever gotten. To just say things as if you find a way to start with the fact the Book of Mormon is true, you can draw any theory. You can discount anything you don't like. You can just say the things that make it so Joseph Smith is on a pedestal, as opposed to these progressives, as opposed to these people who are looking at alternative facts, other sources, compelled by Satan, and that the only way to know truth is that you have to follow the example of the Book of Mormon for true history as closely as possible, and not be concerned with those that feel this direction is unprofessional or non-academic. There you have it. The Book of Mormon contains true science. And what they mean by that is like the viral video that I had at the Book of Mormon Evidence Conference, which maybe I can splice and write in a minute, that their entire system, this entire faction of Mormonism, all depends on pitting the ways of the world, the science, what we understand from evolution, against what Joseph Smith said. And if Joseph Smith said that the earth is 7,000 years old, that's what it means. And that the very validity of the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith as a prophet rests on the Genesis story, Moses being a real person that could have appeared to Joseph Smith in the Kirtland temple, right? So it contains a true science. And so then when you say, all right, well, like the earth wasn't really flooded and like the Tower of Babel didn't really fall, these are all myths and stories, they push back against that really, really hard, because they're saying there is two ways of interpreting this. You have to be either a traditionalist and follow the text as what it says, completely ignoring the contradictions, that there's no myth, there's no allegory, that if the scriptures say that this is what happened and this is how the creation happened, well, then obviously, okay, the earth is 7,000 years old and that can't be evolution. And anyone who says that there is evolution, well, would you look at that? Charles Darwin took off on his little boat to go develop evolution the same year that the church was restored. Whenever God does something, Satan always creates a counterfeit, is a philosophy of theirs.
2 minutes from the Book of Mormon Evidence Conference. I was unprepared for the direction
Joseph
this
Smith
speech
said that
went.
whenever the kingdom of God is set up, there's always the counterfeit. So the counterfeit is set up in the same year. But it doesn't end there, because the very next year, Charles Darwin is about to get on board the HMS Beagle, and he gives the captain of the ship gives him a copy of the book, Principles of Geology, and he says in his own journal, he says, this is what I needed for evolution. Kind of a few things here, like number one, the earth before the sun in the Bible, but according to modern science, the sun comes before the earth. Oceans before land in the Bible, the land before oceans according to modern science. Do you see how easy we can just have these run side by side? Not at all. They're directly opposing views. These are the two opposing views. And we can go down light, plants, trees, fish. All of these things continue on. Marine animals before land, birds before reptiles. Remember, modern science thinks the birds are the descendants of the dinosaurs. So the reptiles were first, now they're into birds. Atmosphere between two layers of water, man before death. All of this comes down to one thing. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and God created man. But according to modern science, man created God. There is no way to blend what modern science has done with what the scriptures say. And so the point we are right now is, who will we trust? And Joseph Smith, who was given the right to see Moses and see him in person in the Kirtland temple, and to reaffirm that story when he receives the revelation in 1830, translating the Book of or the Bible, or you can believe Charles Lyell and Charles Darwin. Those are the two choices that we have. So it's either the big picture of modern science with a hot molten earth and everything coming from chemicals and nothing, or it's a hydroplanet, an earth that is built on water.
So you have science, but as she says, Book of Mormon contains true science. True science is that after Noah's flood and before it too, all of the water of the earth had to go somewhere. It had to recede back into the earth. And so while you might think that the earth is like a ball of nickel or magma and it's a hot, hot core, it's actually an ice core. It's actually a water ice core, and that's where all the water from Noah's flood was. True science, when you see petrified wood, that is a leftover from Noah's flood, because all of the wood that was around in his day, that all the monkeys were swinging on, trees are all that they were all petrified in Noah's flood. True science. True science. We start with the conclusion that anything that we get from the restored gospel is true. The restored gospel supports the Bible, and whatever the Bible says that Joseph Smith reiterates and the following prophets reiterate and confirm to be true, we are going to work backwards from that conclusion And while you guys are out there in your universities writing your essays that are peer reviewed, lame, we're teaching our kids true science at Truth Seekers Academy. The kind where you start with your conclusion and then work backwards until you find any theory that just sounds remotely plausible and go with that. The Book of Mormon was written with the objectivity and omniscience of God. Omniscience of God. God knows everything, but he didn't know not to put in the Book of Mormon that polygamy, super bad, I'm against it. God says no polygamy in the Book of Mormon. And then just a couple years later, he's going to tell the prophet who he translated the Book of Mormon through, he's going to tell that guy, second thoughts on polygamy. I know this is supposed to be the most correct book of all time, but I do have some updates. I actually do want you to practice polygamy. And God's like, people think I'm perfect. I am not perfect. Sometimes I'm like, absolutely don't practice polygamy. It is forbidden. But Joseph, you're doing a really good job. You deserve some. How many teenagers do you want? God's like, yeah, omniscient. Like I throw that around. I know. Like, okay, just throw me under the bus. I want you to write this thing called the happiness letter. And I want you to make sure that the women that you're coming on to, that they know that like, the world just doesn't always get like what really makes people happy. And there's a secret thing called polygamy. I didn't put it in the Book of Mormon because I didn't think they'd understand. So just totally throw me under the bus. Okay. Like omniscience, like, I don't know. Yeah. It's like, what does that even mean? So I know that I told you to write in the Book of Mormon that polygamy, totally don't do that. But one thing that I didn't know is how easy it would be for people to follow you and do everything that you say when I just thought it would be harder. I just thought like polygamy won't even work. Like, like when I had you write that in the Book of Mormon, I just thought like polygamy, like out of the question. But I didn't realize how many people would really listen to everything that you say. Like when we were trying to get the funding to print the Book of Mormon and Martin Harris was like, I'm gonna have to mortgage my farm and my wife is just not into that. And when I told you to tell him that I'm gonna destroy him and I'm just like gonna fuck him up. And then he mortgaged his farm to pay for the printing of the Book of Mormon. I'm like, this is easy. Like, I know before I said no polygamy, but this is actually like, we can get anything that we want. Do you want to be king of the world? What do you mean? Like, you think that people are going to get mad at you? You just keep saying that you're a prophet enough and that you speak for me, and I got your back. Throw me under the bus anytime that you want, by the way. So I want you to write this thing called the Book of Commandments. And when you get to section like 101, let's say, I want you to say polygamy. What are you guys talking about? I already made myself clear. No polygamy. Then I want you to take that out and I want you to rename it Doctrine and Covenants. And I want you to edit it. And then people will be like, whoa, what is this? It's like a totally different thing with a different name. Tell your wife that she's going to be destroyed if she doesn't get with it. She'll listen. Joseph, I am such a spaz. I've just got a couple different names for the church that I want you to go with. Sometimes you just like have to get the name out there and put it on a building and like see how it looks to know if you like actually like it or if it's like available. But please throw me under the bus. If I decide to change the church, you tell them that it came from me and it wasn't just because there wasn't a revelation to begin with. That would be silly. I'm just like all over the place with revelation. And listen, I know that I told you after you wrote the Book of Mormon to tell everyone that's it. That's the end of your revelations. You're going to have no more revelations to give. And that's going to be a real like final emphatic statement. But to be honest, I drunk texted you that. I'm just going to work out a system and I'm going to make like an apologetics book where if at any point somebody's like, hey, that's a contradiction. I got a quote for you that I want you to say. This is verbatim. This is what I want you to say. Okay, Joseph, I want you to tell everyone that before you joined this church, you stood on neutral ground. When the gospel was preached, good or evil were set before you, and you should choose either or neither. There were two opposite masters inviting you to serve them. When you joined the church, even if you were born into it, just go with it, you know? You enlisted to serve God. When you did that, you left the neutral ground and you never can go back onto it. Should you forsake the master you enlisted to serve, me, it will be by the instigation of the evil one and you will follow his dictation and be his servant. So any contradiction, failed prophecies or whatever, it's not because I'm not omniscient. It's because Satan. So that like totally works together with my plan that my other son, Lucifer, would come down to earth and then him and 1/3 of the hosts in heaven would be demons. So it's like 9.3 demons per each person. So that's plenty of demons on earth to possess all of these people, all of my spirit children, which I love so much. And I want them all to return to me, all 100 billion of them. That's perfect, because if they don't worry if they don't like what you say. Got it covered. I'm omniscient. Remember? The Book of Mormon is not written with a naturalistic or materialistic frame, and true historians should follow this model. Oh, true historians. I noticed you're a historian of Native American history and cultures. Hannah Stoddard would be like, oh, I was flipping through your book here and noticed that you didn't say anything about how all of these people used to be white before they sinned against Jehovah. Untrustworthy? Wish I could call you a true historian, but I can't. You ever read a little book called The Book of Mormon? True historians would have read that and made sure that their history of the Native Americans included the fact that they sailed to America in 600 BC. I noticed that you said that they came across the Bering Strait. I noticed that you said that the Native Americans got horses from the Spanish. I am sorry, but horses were actually here a lot earlier than that. As the Book of Mormon states, they were riding horse-drawn chariots into million-person battles. I don't know what the Native Americans are that you're talking about, but if you read the Book of Mormon, you could be on your way to at least being a true historian. So the reason why I needed to set all of that up is because there is not a single source. There's nothing I could say. There's nothing that these fundamentalist types of Mormons would ever believe, the way that their brain works, how they funnel information. So now that you understand a little bit more about Hannah, her philosophies, hopefully you've already watched my response video, my video I did last week about how when we brought Rod Meldrum on Mormon Stories, the things that he said, the things he believes, and that the church is like the prophet will never lead the church astray, but they still have to listen to these historians, and they don't want to be, ousted from their historian academic institution. So the prophet, they have to listen to these historians, but unfortunately, the historians, not only did they get affidavits from people who don't even like Joseph Smith, Joseph Smith said that he is going to be on the right hand of Jesus Christ. All the other prophets have had visions that that's where Joseph Smith is. And Brigham Young was like, I had a vision, and Joseph Smith was right there on the right hand of Jesus. What people are saying about Joseph Smith, that doesn't sound like somebody who's going to be on the right hand of Jesus Christ. So obviously what they're saying isn't true. The things they say aren't true. Oh, you think they're facts? Are they historical and follow the items as laid out as how Mormon talked about history? Because remember, he said God is omniscient. He wouldn't have Joseph do something that would be a thing that a false prophet would do. Mormon wouldn't say that the Book of Mormon is ancient and truly historical if that wasn't a true thing. So if somebody wants to nuance this and make it into a big tent Mormonism, that goes against what Joseph Smith said. They want to say that evolution happened. That goes against what all of the prophets have said. So you've got a choice before you. This video, Mormons, you are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you guys are so welcome to tell me your thoughts, because they lay out a concrete case, to be honest, that if you believe in what Joseph Smith said, you believe that he's a prophet, you believe him at his word, that he said that I've hardly done anything wrong. I'll be standing on the right hand of Jesus Christ. As a matter of fact, this is the most correct book on earth. You take Joseph Smith as the restorer of the gospel at his word. Can he lie? To them, he can't lie. To them, he couldn't possibly be a treasure digger. That is a demonic practice. Can the church use demonic things to bring about God's work and his glory? No, they cannot, because Satan will always have a counterfeit. Remember, evolution, counterfeit to God's creation. Actual good graphic design, counterfeit to this. So I've read probably 4 books. I've researched this for days. I've had so much fun doing this. But at the end of the day, as an agent for Satan, as somebody who's an ex-Mormon, the facts don't matter. And even playing by their own logic doesn't matter. So I thought, why not make this video a little bit fun? As an agent for Satan, I wanted to use a satanic device to make sure that I stay in tune with the Satan spirit. And at any point during this video where I make what I feel like is a very concrete, logical, fact-based, scholarly, sourced, completely in line with every check and balance that there could be. Point, I am going to supercharge my power and just like use my satanic device, which Hannah says is not the way the Book of Mormon was translated, that is a progressive lie that just so happens to be forwarded by Russell M. Nelson, the prophet of the church, and just happens to be forwarded by Brad Wilcox, like one of the largest religion professors at BYU. If it's good enough for the leaders of your church to explain how the Book of Mormon was translated by the gift and power of God, but you actually, Hannah, believe that Joseph Smith didn't do that, and if he did, that would have been satanic, and therefore he wouldn't be a prophet. So just like Joseph Smith, you look inside the hat, and it's just smooth surface, like Brad Wilcox says, where words appear. So according to Hannah, that is satanic. Joseph Smith never did that. So I thought, let's utilize that for this. If looking into a hat and getting messages is an agent for Satan, he's probably going to tell me some really cool stuff. He's probably really going to help me out in this video. I'm getting my first message right now. It says, everyone subscribe to this channel, like, comment for the algorithm, and join me over on Patreon. So far, so good. So for people who are unfamiliar with the story of Joseph Smith's treasure digging, as I was for the majority of my life till I was 29 years old, I had no idea that Joseph Smith engaged in this practice. And so yes, it was shocking for me to know that this was the type of debaucherous behavior that he did right up until he received the golden plates from Moroni and translated them into the Book of Mormon, is now starting to become more on the mainstream. So church historians for a long time, church prophets for a long time have denied that Joseph Smith ever was a treasure digger because it is very embarrassing. And when you link it to the method in which he created the Book of Mormon, there are a lot of similarities, and that calls into question his credibility, calls into question the authenticity and the ancient record that is supposed to be the Book of Mormon. The church is now finally becoming more transparent, trying to inoculate members so that if, in the kids in the seminary classes, that if they hear that Joseph Smith was a treasure digger, they're not as shocked as we were because the church wants to be the first one to tell them about it so that they can lay the proper context around it and inoculate them. So on the church's website, Joseph the Seer, this gives a fine rundown of it. This is by Richard E. Turley, Jr., Assistant Church Historian and Recorder, Robin S. Jensen, and Mark Ashurst McGee, Church History Departments. Just to clarify, Hannah, I've read your book. I understand completely. All of these people, to you, have all been indoctrinated into a progressive socialist. They think they have God telling them what to say and what history to teach, but that is just like Korihor and just a false spirit that is of the devil. There is no in between. These people have been taught by Leonard Arrington what they say to put on the official website for your church is directed by Satan. So don't think I didn't read your book. I totally got your point. But that being said, this is what the official church has to say about Joseph and his treasure digging. The historical record clarifies how Joseph Smith fulfilled his role as a seer and translated the Book of Mormon. Seeing and seers were part of the American and family culture in which Joseph Smith grew up, steeped in the language of the Bible and a mixture of Anglo-European cultures brought over by immigrants to North America. Some people in the early 19th century believed it was possible for gifted individuals to see or receive spiritual manifestations through material objects such as seer stones. The young Joseph Smith accepted such familiar folk ways. She's going to call folk magic in a minute practice of the devil. So just like, yeah, it's the folk ways. And Hannah's going to be like, the devil's ways. So including the idea of using seer stones to view lost or hidden objects. Since the biblical narrative showed God using physical objects to focus people's faith or communicate spiritually in ancient times, Joseph and others assumed the same for their day. Joseph's parents, Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy Mack Smith, affirmed the family's immersion in this culture and their use of physical objects in this way. And the villagers of Palmyra in Manchester, New York, where the Smiths lived, sought out Joseph to find lost objects before he moved to Palmyra in late 1827. So if you remember back to the Rod Meldrum interview that I responded to last week, he emphatically claims that Joseph was just a hired digger hand. And he actually tried to talk people out of doing this. Completely false. And even here in the church's own record says that people sought him out, that that's what he was known for doing, sought him out for doing this fraudulent practice. And Rod's point, which I still can't get over, it is absurd. He knows, he's read all of this stuff and he can't play dumb. But for some strange reason, when me and John DeLynn were talking to him, and he tried as if he thought he was gonna score points or something, Rod said, well, if Joseph was out treasure digging, then why was he poor his whole life? Why was he always working for somebody else? And it's like, if somebody's a psychic and they have a bunch of people come in and they look in their crystal ball and they tell them a bunch of stuff and they pay them a bunch of money and none of that stuff ever comes true, why don't they just use that crystal ball to like pick lottery numbers or bet on the stock market? It's because it is in the practice of a fraud to make people believe they have powers that they don't have. There wasn't any treasure. And people still, it is a testament to Joseph's ability to manipulate and con people. It is not a testament to the ability to find treasure because there was no treasure. Because looking at magic stones inside of a hat is not a way to find treasure. But that is what Joseph's did. That is the practice that got so many people angry at him for defrauding them over. That's what he did for the years and years as he was still traveling every single September to go visit the Hill Cumorah, to go ask Moroni if it's time to take out the plates yet. But that's what he was doing. That's what he was known for. At the same time, still yet after he apparently at the age of 14 or 16, it's kind of funny, it's a fuzzy number, that he saw God and or Jesus Christ and or angels tell him he was forgiven of his sins and or that there is no true church and he needs to start his own one in the sacred grove. That God told him to do that at the age of, let's say, 14, if you want to go with one record of what he said happened. According to President Hinckley, the most important event in all of human history, that either it happened or it didn't happen, and the very validity of the church rests on it. So it's interesting how fuzzy those numbers are, that's what he did at 14. That's what he saw. That situation happened. And then he was still known around the town for treasure digging. And then still every September or whatever, going to the Hill Cumorah, asking Moroni if he was ready to take the golden plates, and him saying, not yet, bro. And goes and talks to Moroni for 4 or 5 years, every single summer, coming back and saying, like, am I ready to take it out yet? And then it's really interesting if you can like logically put these pieces together of what Joseph Smith kind of admits Moroni was saying to him, that indicates that Moroni is like, hey, I know you've been up to some treasure digging. In the history Joseph Smith began drafting in 1838, Moroni warns him that Satan would try to tempt me in consequence of the indignant circumstances my father's family to get the plates for the purpose of getting rich. It's like Moroni's telling me, I know you've been treasure digging and you've been trying to find things in the earth getting rich. Not this time. Not this time, Joe. This the angel forbade. Joseph recounts saying that if he had any other motive than building God's kingdom, he could not get them. In his earlier 1832 history, Joseph explains, I sought the plates to obtain riches and kept not the commandments that I should have a single eye to the glory of God. As a result, he was required to return to the hill annually for 4 years until he was prepared to receive the plates. So we've got that admission, not just from the LDS Church, but from Joseph Smith himself. Okay. And then for those without an understanding of how 19th century people in Joseph's region lived their religion, seer stones can be unfamiliar. And scholars have long debated this period of his life, partly as a result of the Enlightenment age of reason, a period that emphasized science and the observable world over spiritual matters. Many of Joseph's day came to feel that the use of physical objects such as stones or rods was superstitious or inappropriate for religious purposes. Hannah agrees. In later years, as Joseph told his remarkable story, he emphasized his visions and other spiritual experiences. Some of his former associates focused on his early use of seer stones in an effort to destroy his reputation in a world that increasingly rejected such practices. In their proselytizing efforts, Joseph and other early members chose not to focus on the influence of folk culture, as many prospective converts were experiencing a transformation of how they understood religion in the Age of Reason. In what became canonized revelation, however, Joseph continued to teach that seer stones and other seeric devices, as well as the ability to work with them, were important and sacred gifts from God. So much, much more on this later. Just put that in your head, okay? And so, like many ex-Mormons who are like, he was doing what now? What the huh? And the church comes in with this context. This is the context they give you. But by 1833, Joseph and his associates began using the biblical term Urim and Thummim. So anytime you were in seminary and you heard that the Book of Mormon was translated by the gift and power of God and also the Urim and Thummim, and you're like, is that like that breastplate and those eyeglass things? You're like, yeah, that's what we mean. And also this stone that we have in the church vault that we're showing people now. I guess we could have President Nelson. Do you want to just show them? Do you want to just put your face in the hat and say, this is how it was done so that they can get over it? So yes, it's that, but also we're going to call the Urim and Thummim that you had an idea of what that was in your head. And you were like, if I remember correctly, all of the videos and stuff from the church that I saw were like Joseph Smith running his hands over the plates, and he had like this breastplate and it had like these spectacles attached to it and had like these clear stones in it that were like buried in the box, that when he retrieved the golden plates, that's how he was supposed to do it. And it's a long story. It's a long, boring story, but basically we forgot to tell you guys that he was telling people that he had this ability to see where buried treasure was underground, and that he would go up to gullible farmers and say, there's a silver mine buried on your property, and I can do a little spell and I can put this stone in this hat. And the way that I got the stone, it's another long story, but I actually got it from a witch named Sally Chase. I found my own seer stone and I put it in this hat, and I'm blocking out the light so that if you look over here, you might think that there's actually nothing being written on the stone. It's just, I'm the special guy. I can see it. If you were worried that we didn't tell you the whole story, it's just because it's not because we lied to you. It's just complicated. Okay. It's that like you were thinking that he had his hands running over the plates. The church is like, history, am I right? It's just long, it's boring, it's just got all these details about how the most correct book that's ever come into existence and that is going to be the complete keystone of our religion. It just happens that Urim and Thummim is just like another name that Joseph decided to use later on because rock in a hat that I got from a witch while digging a well that I used on 18 different treasure digs where I defrauded farmers wasn't getting the converts in. So we called it the Urim and Thummim. We used the biblical term instead of the folk magic term. This makes sense, right? Like you're not mad at us, are you? Now we're going to get into Hannah explaining how that never happened. And you're going to watch me absolutely tear her a new, let's see, what swear word should I use? I can't say that.
You say Joseph Smith was no treasure digger, ! Wow. Them's be fighting words. Back it up. What's going on?
It definitely is. I think it's probably one of the sacred cows of modern academia circles, Mormonism.
He was a treasure digger.
Right. Yeah. If you challenge that, or challenge the more magical worldview, it seems like that just.
Okay, can I just say the only thing that popped up in my mind is I read Gospel Rolling by your boy right. Richard Bushman. I know he's your favorite. But,
absolutely.
Yeah. I thought that he contextualized it very well, at least just in a way that sat fine with me. And he said it appeared that not a fascination, but an interest as a young man in the occult and treasure and magic and folklore was almost like a preparatory priesthood for the reality of God's power. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. That kind of makes sense to me. Nobody has to get indicted. We all walk away from this just fine. You know what I'm saying? But you say, heck no, he was no treasure digger. Don't you go slander my prophet.
As you can tell there, Carden was doing a jokety joke, as he's such a funny guy. I have nothing bad to say. Carden was making a little jokey joke, saying that Hannah Stoddard loves church historian Richard Bushman, author of Rough Stone Rolling. And that's the type of humor where you say the opposite thing than the thing that is true. And Hannah likes to do that, but without the joking around it. Because Hannah's not going to say in this video, but I just want to give you as much context as possible of why that's a joke, why Hannah is famously against Richard Bushman. Also, if you remember back to Rod Meldrum's interview with me and John DeLynn, he says that Richard Bushman is pulling, he's like like, what would you do if someone wanted to write a biography of you and their top sources are about people who hated your guts and wanted to drink your blood, and the church historian is pulling their affidavits? What's up with that guy? He can't be trusted. What kind of church historian would do that? He's slandering the prophet. And you could say, well, maybe they had a reason to hate Joseph Smith and he was just telling like the truth of it, but he's at least going to spin it and put it into a context about a preparatory gospel, that he was doing this treasure digging before the church, like before he got the plates, and that like helped make sense because we have Fawn Brody, who wrote No One Knows My History, and she said all of the stuff that Joseph Smith did, but she didn't give a spin to it, and the church really needs a response to Fawn Brody, and something that we can actually sell at Deseret Book that doesn't tear down the prophet quite as much, but still tells the same story from all of the same sources. People like Hannah and people like Rod Meldrum are there to say, no, because didn't you hear me the first time? Those sources are inspired by Satan. So Richard Bushman is using Satan's sources. He cannot be trusted. So, quote from the book. Richard L. Bushman, progressive historian, and they use the word progressive as just meaning opposite of us, opposite of the traditionalists who say, if it happened the way Joseph Smith said it happened, that's how it absolutely happened. Anything else is what we're going to call progressive, down to hell. Okay. Would later echo this sentiment, basically saying that Josiah Stoll was like, yeah, Joseph Smith, yeah, he was treasure digging on my farm. I paid him, and it's fine. He can mix Christianity and magic together. It's not a big deal. Adding that Joseph was involved in magic and had treasure-seeking greed, and that magic was a preparatory gospel in training the young man as a prophet of God. However, Bushman argued that all sorts of treasure seekers were also serious Christians, so to him, it was just not a big deal. Worked previously as a research assistant for former church historian Leonard Arrington, and they really do not like Leonard Arrington. Again, he voted for FDR. What more do you need to know? He said that he was led by God to help usher in this new generation of people who understood church history as it's actually written. But may I remind you, some people are deceived by Satan, and sometimes they teach other historians, like D. Michael Quinn, like Richard Bushman. In 1987, Quinn published Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview, wherein he presented his case that the Smith family was deeply immersed in ritual magic, and the occult was in many ways the foundation for the restoration. Progressive historian Richard Bushman applauded Quinn's work, calling it ingenious and erudite, and that anyone dealing with magic in relationship to Mormonism will have to start with Quinn's study. But he didn't practice. He didn't do those things. People are talking about my prophet. They're saying that he practiced magic. You gotta listen to me. I feel like I'm being swallowed up by progressive historians who are saying things that go against the narrative that I want to believe about my prophet. What's happening to me? Back cover. Do you have a loved one who is struggling with a faith crisis? Do you want to know why? It is because of people like Richard Bushman. He says, I think that for the church to remain strong, it has to reconstruct its narrative. The dominant narrative is not true, and it can't be sustained. The church has to absorb all of this new information, or it will be on very shaky grounds. And that's what it's trying to do. And it will be a strain for a lot of people, older people especially, but I think it has to change. Totally based. And so Hannah and her dad go on to say, who is this new Joseph Smith, and what constitutes a reconstructed narrative? Has Richard Bushman never heard of that when people present facts, you just say that you get to ignore them because they're possessed by Satan? You should try it, Richard. For those who are unaware, so stupid. For those who are unaware, Bushman's book, Rough Stone Rolling, presents Joseph Smith, who differs dramatically from the Joseph Smith advocated by past leaders, teachers, and scholars in the church. It contrasts to what has been taught traditionally. Rough Stone Rolling proposes this reinterpretation. 1. Joseph Smith was involved in magic. Joseph Smith's involvement in magic was a preparatory gospel, and remnants of magical culture stayed with him until the end. Joseph Smith gave angry responses and lashed back. Joseph Smith, right hand next to Jesus Christ, who flipped over tables, the money changers at the temple. Didn't he know better than Jesus Christ to ever get angry? Joseph Smith had easily bruised pride and was able to bear criticism and rebuke anyone who challenged him. Didn't they know that when Joseph burned down the printing press, as written in the book by Dallin H. Oakes, that he did that because that's what he needed to do to save the church? And then other than that, he was perfect? Stupid. Joseph Smith suffered from treasure-seeking greed. How dare Richard Bushman write that? Just because Joseph Smith wrote that about himself in his own history of what the angel Moroni said about him and his fears about him getting the golden plates prematurely doesn't mean it's true. The Smith family had been diagnosed as a dysfunctional family that produced a psychologically crippled son. Based. Joseph Smith married 22 women behind his wife Emma's back, and then to make sure that she was okay with it, said that she would be destroyed in a revelation direct from God. Does that sound like a psychologically crippled person? Sounds like a prophet. Sounds like prophet language to me. Richard Bushman also said in Rough Stone Rolling that Joseph Smith had outrageous confidence for attempting the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible. In case you didn't know, he did translate it correctly from the Adam Clarke Bible commentary as discovered by BYU itself. God doesn't reinvent the wheel. He says, translate, copy, plagiarize, say it's a translation. Anyone who doubts it, will call them satanic after you're dead. Get to it, Joseph. Joseph from time to time drank too much? Oh, really, Richard Bushman? Are you saying that he opened a tavern in his house like some freaking alcoholic? Because he just did that because Emma was out of town in St. Louis shopping for drapes for their new mansion that they got because he was prophet and he could do whatever he wanted. And he had already preached a sermon just previously saying that no person can hold the priesthood if they don't abstain from alcohol. Do people who drink too much put taverns inside their house when their wife's away with lots of small children at home to the point that their wife says, either the tavern goes or I go? Psychologically crippled son? Overconfident much? Where are you getting this from, Richard? Where are you getting this from? So yeah, Hannah does not like Richard Bushman because he doesn't understand true history. True history wherein Joseph Smith was perfect, right hand of God, never did anything wrong. And Richard Bushman is trying to write a new history. Unless your name is Mormon the Prophet. Hannah's like, nice try, Richard. Caught you red-handed trying to say things about Joseph Smith that are not super becoming of a prophet.
Not only would I say, and this would be a bold statement, but I would say I would challenge anyone to produce a source that they really feel is genuinely credible. And we can go through some of those right here. And then number two, I don't believe that it's even doctrinally congruent. And that is another huge contention. People are like, oh, it's just fine if he was. I think we actually walked through the doctrine.
Challenge accepted. Let's see what the hat has to say. Mm-hmm. It says, drink some more coffee because this is going to be a long video. So find her a source. We're going to get into that in a second. And I will play by all of your rules, Hannah. Just you wait. Just you wait. Find you a source, Hannah. We'll play by even your traditionalist rule that it's not doctrinal. And that is a fascinating one because that's actually really what it's about more than anything. But interesting. The things I have to share. So when asking what is true about history, what events happened in Joseph Smith's life before he founded the church and created the doctrine, the history is the only thing that is relevant. Then what's asking what's true from that point forward. So while Hannah's thinking what Joseph Smith said about himself is true, what Joseph Smith wrote in the Book of Mormon about himself and about how we decipher what good history is because ancient people lived here and we start from that premise and work our way backwards, that is not how critical thinking works. I know that's of the devil, and I know I just sound like a freaking philosophy law professor with my learned ways of men, but you just gotta trust me that you have to figure out what happened in Joseph Smith's life before he founded the church as objectively as possible, and then how the events before that influences the doctrine that he created. You need to just take a step back and just be a little bit more objective if you want to get to the truth, not just, I have a special ego about holding on to being a 16-year-old who creates documentaries that people in my homeschool group they're flying off the shelves when they come in and buy them. If this is the most important work and we're trying to convert people and we're sending missionaries around the world, And there are people in faith crisis, and this church, it's just flatlining in baptisms. We've got to figure out how people who make their covenants can keep their covenants. And if that was really your objective, you would understand that Richard Bushman is doing the best that he can with the evidence provided. But when you start with your conclusion that Joseph Smith couldn't have done this because it's not a prophet thing for him to do, you're helping no one except yourself and your clan and your people who just want to feel like they are more special and enlightened because they're on the inside. They know more than the prophet, technically, because he's listened to these historians. We're in the inside. I go into all of this in my video with Rod Meldrum about the psychoanalysis of fundamentalist Mormons like this, that as the world and the church moves toward more openness and progression, people always are reactionary and they go back to some of the most obscene, absurd theories and ideas, all the while demonizing anyone else who's not as smart and spiritual as them to figure it all out. And then in that absurdity of claiming things that are just, you can't just, hey, Hannah, you can't just say that it didn't happen because you don't like that it happened. But and Hannah's like, well, what if I say something so absurd that it just means I have more faith? It means that I'm actually just more spiritual, and that anyone who doesn't understand it the way I understand, they got some work to do. So it's an ego thing. It's like literally, you want to talk about satanic, like that's an ego thing. Yes, I am a lover of Eckhart Tolle. Yes, I am a lover of mindfulness. And in a system where you can't just admit facts because your ego is so dependent on protecting it, you have such a sunken cost into this that your brain won't possibly allow you to grow into actual true things that would help you and help the people around you actually maybe overcome a faith crisis and maybe actually stay in the church with with a better understanding about how it was restored. It all just comes from a place of ego. But Mormons, I hear you. I know what you're saying. You're going to come back at me just like you did in the comment section on my Rod Meldrum video where he said that he's throwing starfish out. Good for him. And I'm like, what if those starfish are actually suffocating and you're throwing them into fresh water? Because the very system and confinement is so dogmatic and doesn't allow people who are gay or like don't like to be told that they have to be a polygamist wife in heaven, that the very system is not a good one. And I heard you Mormons and you guys said, no, Kara, you're just like Rod. How do you know you're not the one throwing ex-Mormons, people in faith crisis, into the salt water? You are the one. And to that, I have to say, there was a comment that said, the sense I get from you, NuanceHoe, is that you now know which ocean is objectively correct ocean to throw starfish into, and it's different from the ocean that you used to know was objectively the real ocean. I would have never been that dogmatic, by the way, back in the olden true days of the church. We're all tossing starfish into the ocean that we think are correct. So how can you really fault Ron for doing what you were also doing? And to respond to that idea, I just wanted to say, I have no idea why anything I have said or done would make you think that I have any plot to place ex-Mormons into a confinement that in any way resembles the closed-minded, high-demand fundamentalist thinking that Ron espouses. I have a video about why I left religion and Christianity altogether, where I go over in detail Jonathan Streeter's analysis on how to use steel tools versus wood tools when reasoning through religious claims, or any claim for that matter. I often use the analogy he uses of Thomas Edison trying out thousands of different filaments before arriving at the right one, relating to how when you know what doesn't light up, you discard it and you don't go back and try new things till you find out what works. And I've always stuck by that sentiment. From my Mormon Stories interview in April 2021, I've been extremely nuanced and said then, as I say now, that I haven't walked in everyone's shoes, and I don't know if leaving the church is right for everyone because I don't know your life. Only you know your life. So if there's something else that you're referencing that leads you to conclude that I am just like Ron, I am listening. Because all I'm asking is for people to think critically and find what they connect with spiritually. And you can't do that in a fundamentalist worldview. You just can't. So if the system of belief that Joseph set up throughout his life is the one where the Holy Ghost, who is the one of the third of the Mormon Godhead, and it tells you what is doctrinal and what is from Elohim, God the Father, and what you feel is being spoken to you by God is doctrinal. And in that belief is a doctrine of what Hannah is going to describe as Satan having the ability to deceive, Satan tainting the truth of Christ, Satan's influences that don't need to be proven, but are set up as a given. That he's just like, that's part of the system. He's just like, he can deceive people, don't you know? Like, if you don't believe that, you're deceived, you know? So you are engaging in this circular thinking, this circular reasoning, because you are assuming what is yet to be proven. The premise already contains your conclusion. And Hannah is not objective at looking at what history says because she doesn't accept sources that don't already contain her conclusion, because she believes more in doctrine as set up by Joseph Smith than anything else. So when she says like sacred cows of academia, that's like a phrase co-opted from like other circles who actually engage in critical thought and critique. Who are you, Hannah, to even know what a critique looks like when it says in your book that you do not respect any types of academia that do not agree with the prophets? That's what it said. That's what the book says. That's what the book says. Quote from Joseph Fielding Smith that says, as long as what academia teaches is completely in line with the church leaders, A-okay. If it differs, whether it's evolution, anything else, throw it out. So don't act like, it's just funny. So like, Hannah, don't act like, yeah, this is one of those sacred cows of academia. I'm always just in those academic circles being like, you guys should question this. You guys should question this. You already say that academics take a naturalistic, materialistic view that you wholeheartedly reject. Sacred cow. It's like, you think the treasure digging is the sacred cow. You think that all of the things that they have to say are bunk unless they agree with you. So if you actually want to engage in critical thought and critique with people who can question sacred cows, yeah, they exist in academia, who actually employ rationality and reason when trying to get at what's true, like, let's do it. But when we're talking about history of a religion that's only been around for 200 years, and the academia, as well as the church leaders you sustain as mouthpieces of God, are in agreement about history, the history of Joseph Smith's treasure digging, like mainly, you know, that it happened. It is not a sacred cow as much as it is just a pair of eyeglasses that you put on your face, that you should be able to see clearly into the past, see a clear vision. But it's a sacred cow. It's just a conspiracy. It's just Satan at work. That is a conspiracy. Like, she is a conspiracy theorist trying to call out this conspiracy by Satan without realizing you're just a living, breathing conspiracy theorist. And as I think I have ample evidence to show, Hannah is not in any way qualified with intellectual honesty to be someone to question the sacred cows of academia anyway. Like, yeah, sure, question them. Let's have at it. You say they don't get along with fair Mormon. They don't get along with apologetics. That's actually what's interesting about this, is that the word apologia comes from like the word to explain to outsiders. So technically, they're not even an apologist, because this book is not to explain the world to outsiders. Her theories are not to explain the world to outsiders because they wouldn't get it. They go by a different standard of logic and naturalistic claims. That's what historians, that's what scientists do. But if you don't start with the lens that Joseph Smith was a true prophet, then you will never actually get to the truth. So for Hannah to set herself up like she is ready to question the sacred cows of academia when she takes the less than rational, most conspiratorial point of view every single time. She's a conspiracy theorist within this Mormon paradigm. That's why I'm so fascinated. And she won't hold to any facts. And there's a whole conference of people that she can sell her conspiracy DVDs and books to. So I'm just saying, it's fascinating. We are seeing a conspiracy theorist's ego on display for all to see here. So yeah, so then Carden goes on to say, well, couldn't this treasure digging that Joseph Smith did that I heard about from Rough Stone Rolling, could that just be like, it doesn't have to be occult stuff, or could it just be like a preparatory priesthood for Joseph? And Hannah comes back with like, no. Wherever God goes, Satan sets himself up as a counterfeit, and there is no neutral ground, she says. God does not work through this stuff. So to that, you might want to think, okay, like what Joseph Smith was doing that was a counterfeit, like define counterfeit. The best evidence of how I can define how Hannah defines counterfeit, Rod Meldrum, Dean Sessions, Russ Barlow, all of these leaders in this Mormon faction, is a clip from my viral video that I took from the Book of Mormon Evidence Conference. You've got two choices, Darwin or Joseph Smith. Remember how Joseph Smith said that he saw Moses in the Kirtland temple and that reaffirmed the creation of the earth? And that's what Joseph Smith said happened. And Joseph Smith said this happened. And so you can either trust him or you can trust modern science, who says the opposite. And for modern science to be true, then our church has to be false. Ugh. No. You might think that it's true because you're using like logic in your brain, but the only way to decipher real truth is through revelation. And you might think that you're getting revelation, but it's not the right revelation if it doesn't come and stay in line with what we already taught and knew in the church from 200 years ago when we didn't understand germ theory. And it was like Joseph Smith just rattling off stuff like, yeah, Jackson County, Missouri, that's where Adam built his altar. That's where the Garden of Eden was. That's what Joseph Smith said. That's what has to happen. Modern science says that we came out of Africa and our race all used to be dark skinned and that we developed different skin pigments through time. But Joseph Smith said that Black people are cursed with dark skin because Cain slew his brother Abel in a story in the Bible that totally happened. And that's why Black people needed to wait a very, 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 very long time till 1978 to get the priesthood because of what Cain did. That's what Joseph Smith said. This has nothing to do with melanin in the skin like modern science. Modern science can't tell us how to be moral, can't tell us what we ought to do. Not like Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith tells us you got two options. People have dark skin because they have a curse from Cain or a curse from their Lamanite ancestors who sinned against God, and that if they join the church that their skin will eventually become lighter, and that if they want to get into heaven, they can come in as a servant. They're slaves now. They'll just be fine being slaves later. The proper way to treat people with dark skin and African ancestry is just have them be sealed to you as slaves. Joseph Smith taught us how to treat people with dark skin. Hello. And modern science wants to teach us that people with dark skin, and it's just like an evolutionary trait versus people who have lighter skin because of like the places on earth that their ancestors migrated to that had a different amount of sunshine. Are you going to trust modern science or Joseph Smith? Great presentation. Thank you. Russ Barlow, you are truly the anti-intellectual of our time, which it's a badge of honor to you because you are going against what the intellectuals have to say. You're doing the opposite of it, and you're getting applause from the thousands of people in that room. Hannah Stoddard is right there to congratulate you. Rod Meldrum is coming on Mormon Stories months later going, sounds all right to me. My mom is in the back corner mortgaging our house so that she could go on a Book of Mormon Evidence tour around the country with you guys as you look at Native American mounds and say, this is a Book of Mormon site, and this is a Book of Mormon site, and this is a Book of Mormon site. Money, please. Anything that helps us just live in this delusion that we're a fraction of a percent of the entire Earth's population, but we know the actual truth, that everyone out there is wrong and we're right. Oh, it just feels so good to be right. It's so good that my spiritual experiences are the only actual ones in tune with the one true God. Oh, flawless conmanship, flawless con work. Joseph Smith would be so proud because Hannah really does come back out here really going into this literal view of the scriptures. And she is this young earth creationist. And she believes in this heartland model that says that what Joseph Smith said, that the Nephites and the Lamanites, they lived here in the Midwest, in the heartland of America. And so that's where it's got to be. And we'll discount all the evidence of the contrary, and anything that doesn't fit within this literalist view of how I piece things together has got to be wrong. And it again is just very indicative of this lack of intellectual honesty or ability to bend orthodoxy in favor of fundamentalist worldviews. And hey, there's fundamentalists in every religion, and every single type of fundamentalist in every single religion is wrong. Every single fundamentalist. That's what's funny. Every single type of religious person who refuses to bend their orthodoxy for truth, they're all demonstrably wrong. Every single other fundamentalist, except for this one. This fundamentalist one, this one, they got it right. This is the time where fundamentalism is. This is where the omniscient Mormon God comes in, and he's like, every other time I got so many people, I've like given them this elevated emotion, and I've given them all of these sensations in their body, and I have allowed them to just conjecturize the heck out of stuff, thinking that I'm talking to them. Idiots. They're all wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. But the exact same flawed way of deciphering truth and who I am and my nature and everything, they all think that they're right, and they all are like hardening into this fundamentalist view and stuff. But it's just so funny, because I'm going to use that exact same structure of ignoring science, making sure that people stick to like this literal contradictory version of accounts, but I'm going to have one true religion. Guess which one it is? You're never going to guess. Okay, it's the Mormon one. It's the one where half of the scholars are going to say that the keystone of my religion that I'm going to create is going to be created with folk magic and a rock and a hat. And then the other half are going to say, no, that's not how the keystone of my religion was created. And I'm just going to let them fight it out. And when I finally do give my one mouthpiece on Earth in like 2020, I'll finally really set the record straight about race in 2013. I'll let them fight it out for a while. But in like 2020, I'll have my prophet stick his face into a hat and say, this is how it was done. And then I'll still give spiritual promptings to I'll still give like this totally flawed method of deciphering truth, this like elevated emotion spiritual promptings to the people who disagree with him. And then they'll be able to go, I want to put, do you think Mormon Stories will have an opening in like March 2022 for one of them to say that that gay people rebel against me the exact same way as people who fuck kids and diddle goats? I think that'll be fun. I'm just feeling kind of fun and flirty. It's just one of those times where I just feel like I've been doing so much, and I just want to take a load off and just kind of let my church look like it's falling into apostasy. I'm feeling like really overwhelmed lately, like I've been doing a lot. So like sometimes people, when they're away from their computer, when they're working from home, they'll like put on like a YouTube video, or they'll have like a little robot move their mouse around. Like my God version of that is, I'm just going to place in a revelation that says that my prophets will never lead the church astray again. They'll just be like a robot moving the mouse around, kind of like keeping the computer alive, making sure everyone thinks that I'm still like alert and I'm still there. I am a parent. I'm Heavenly Father. Like, you guys know how kids are sometimes. All the cancers that I've created so far to kill kids have all been like technologically been advancing because of this counterfeit science and stuff. So it's just like really hard to keep up creating so many different types of cancers for like children and like global pandemics. I just like got to get out of Kolob for a minute, clear my completely mortal head, take a spaceship. So take this out of the Mormon world for a second. In fundamentalism, religious scriptures are absolute truths, undisputable by anyone or anything, and they dictate all aspects of a fundamentalist's life. Moral codes, core beliefs, they're all adopted straight from the sacred text with no flexibility. That's what we're talking about right here. Is that Mormons? Is that what you... Because I mean, they do make a great case. If Joseph Smith said that the earth was created 7,000 years old and then human evolution was developed the same year, they do make a great case that the earth has to be filled with water. I mean, you heard it. I don't need to repeat it to you, right? So no compromises needed. For argument's sake, if it happened to be Islam, and when fundamentalists are rightly defined as fundamentalists, why do so many Mormons not see that this is classic fundamentalist behavior, untenable with truth? And if we know that fundamentalists tend to separate themselves and their group from the rest of the world and refuse to make compromise, why is it okay when Hannah and Rod Meldrum refuse to make compromises? And I don't care if you've got an arena of people who are there to listen to your conspiracy theories, But if you take a fundamentalist vantage point, you are always, 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 always going to draw a crowd of people who also have deep-rooted insecurities, who glom onto fundamentalism as a reaction to social changes, as a reaction to a society that they can't handle, as a reaction to diversity that they feel is a personal attack to them. But it's not true. It's just a mode of adherence. It's just a mode of operation for the brain and the nervous system. And the fundamentalist brain, going over information, cannot sort facts because their cognitive biases won't allow them to even do it. It's protecting itself. And the motivated reasoning to stay in this ultra-Orthodox mindset is all right here in this video. And if you've got a belief system that depends on interpreting facts as satanic, okay, all through that lens, that there are such things as satanic counterfeits, you will fit objective facts that everyone else understands into that paradigm, into whatever you've already got, whatever backpack you're already carrying. Like Hannah and Rod Meldrum walk around wearing this backpack that they're like, truthy truth, truthy truth, hiking up the hill to the celestial kingdom. Oh, what's this rock? Looks nice. Oh, Jesus Christ, Savior of the world, Redeemer of mankind. And I can live with him forever? That's a nice rock. I'll put that in my backpack. Oh, what's this rock? Jesus Christ, Jehovah created the earth in 7 days, 7,000 years ago, and sent a flood to wipe out all of humanity except for a small group of people that we've all descended from. I like that. I'm gonna put that in my backpack. Wait, what? It's just a solidified piece of dog crap. It's already in my backpack though. I like it. Hannah's like all worried that she's going to pull a muscle if she takes the dog crap out of her backpack. You can believe in Jesus Christ without having to believe in these absurd things. You can believe in Jesus Christ. Heck, you can even believe in a young earth. Just don't think that because the earth is young, that our species evolved with just heterosexual pairings. That's all that God, who created that earth, that's all he ever allows, and everyone else just rebels against him, like pedophiles and people who practice bestiality. You don't have to do the one than the other. You can just totally be like, Jesus Christ, love him, commit my life to him, died on the cross for me, Redeemer of my sins, can't wait to live with him. It just depends on what comes next. What's the and that you're adding to what Jesus Christ said and why? And maybe question that. So far we've got Hannah saying that we need to question the sacred cows of academia. Okay. And also things that are of God will have a counterfeit. Dope. Flawless. And now she's going to tell us a very tainted retelling of how to source things properly, because anyone who didn't like Joseph Smith can't be trusted. And in fact, she can be trusted to source. All the stuff that I've described, she knows how to decipher stuff. If I think I've taught you one thing so far, it's that Hannah can be trusted to source. And this is the type of joke that you make when you don't have any other jokes except for just to say the opposite of what is true. I've been listening to Hannah and Carden enough that now all I know how to do is say the opposite of what is true. Roll clip.
Investigate the sources in the first few chapters of Rough Stone Rolling. When it comes to the treasure digging sources, there's millions of footnotes. So once you actually get to the footnotes that specifically are about the Smith family and folk magic, the majority of them are going to be coming from Mormonism Unveiled. It's published in 1834. It's the first
anti-Mormon book, right?
Yeah, it's really the first just bam opposition against Joseph Smith that just explodes like wildfire. Well, where did it come from? So it comes from most of the documentation comes from a man named Dr. Philosopher Hurlbut.
Incorrect.
He was a member of the church. He was excommunicated from the church shortly after for immorality.
And Doctor was his first name.
Doctor was his first name. He was excommunicated from the church for immorality. The thing he was excommunicated from the church, I go all through this with my video with Bill Reel, because a lot of Mormon apologists, they like to say that he can't be trusted for this reason, and they gave a completely out of context explanation of how Mormonism Unveiled came to be. And the reason that he was excommunicated is actually more complicated. He was out of town serving a mission. He had actually lost his faith on his way to his mission. He was a brand new convert, and then got a mission call. On the way, he realized that the church was not true and that it was made up, but the church didn't know that back in Kirtland, Ohio. And they heard a story from a member of the church. There's a woman who said, hey, I don't like that guy. He was like swearing at me, a lady. And they said, we don't want those type of people in our church. And so they excommunicated him. Sidney Rigdon even said the wording of it makes it kind of ambiguous because he was excommunicated for the exact wording. So when he returned to Kirtland, Flassus learned that while he was gone, he had been excommunicated while he wasn't there to defend himself for unchristian conduct with the female sex, then clarified by Sidney Rigdon, who officiated the trial, that he was kicked out for using obscene language to a young lady who was a member of the church. So then Hurlbut appealed to the Council of High Priests, and the council rescinded the decision and said that he could come back in. And then he later claimed that, like on the DL, I've already lost my faith in this church, but I did tell Joseph when I went to go see him the first time and he converted me, I did tell him that, all right, you're saying you really did this. This Book of Mormon is really, really true. Because Flassus Hurlbut said, Joseph Smith said that this is what Flassus said to him, that if he ever found out that the Book of Mormon wasn't true, that he was going to run him ragged to the end of the earth. And Rod Meldrum says that he was going to drink his blood. I haven't found that quote anywhere, but he did say that he was going to make his life a living hell. And so Joseph's like, yeah, I mean, it's true. It's totally true. Who's gonna find out?
And it was his first name. He was not really a doctor.
If I have another son, I'm gonna name him Doctor.
You would think that's a cool idea, Carter.
Get over here. Hi, I'm a doctor.
You would think
that's
right.
Awesome.
Exactly. So he and he'd already been excommunicated from 2 other Christian denominations for immorality too. So he gets called into the High Council, and he just gives them the huge sob story, and he cries and he mourns, and they're like, you know what, we will let you, you're restored. He's like,
and Hannah has no mention here of the fact that they realized that you can't excommunicate somebody by their own standards, that they need to be there to defend themselves. And I can't see anywhere where it's he cried and was begging to be back in the church. What he said is that he's going to try to deceive Joseph Smith's God by putting on a show that he wants to get back in. And that's not helpful to your narrative, that these people have a mantle and that they're prophets, seers, and revelators, and that they can decipher things. And that if this person is literally going to go forward from this point and write this anti-Mormon book that is going to be the impetus for what they say, what all Mormon apologists say is the literal first anti-Mormon book that is the impetus, that is where people draw all of their inspiration from. What kind of omniscient God is that, by the way? If Joseph Smith's God really existed, why would he, when he's okay, I'll give you another try, but don't you go doing anything on me? He's Joseph Smith had no revelation whatsoever that he shouldn't be let back into the church, because that's what Flassus said he was going to do. He's going to make his life a living hell if he finds out this church isn't true. Finds it out it isn't true. He's excommunicated, comes back in, and he's just there to get more information. Wouldn't the Mormon God know? That's just not helpful to your case, is all I'm trying to say. That doesn't lend a lot of credibility to Joseph Smith as a prophet, just letting you guys know.
Most of the documentation comes from a man named Dr. Flassus Hurlbut.
If you read Dan Vogel's commentary on Mormonism Unveiled, you can see that Hurlbut was only a researcher who collected these affidavits, not a writer. Of the 290 pages in Mormonism Unveiled, his research occupied 40.
He falsifies a ton of affidavits.
That is so debated, and I've seen research on both sides, I think there's compelling arguments on both sides. I can't take a stance for sure. I don't know if it matters a ton, but yes. They're definitely not affidavits like we think affidavits, where you go in the courthouse, it's notarized, there's, it's all above board. He's going home, he's writing down, oh, so-and-so said this. Some statements we know, like Isaac Hale did later say, yes, I did write that. So some of them I know are legit, but.
So that's a really interesting admission from Hannah, that Emma Smith's dad's affidavit, that saying that he was a treasure digger, that I saw Joseph Smith put his face into a hat and walk around and take people on these treasure digs. And at first I thought he was legit, but then I realized he was not a good guy, and he took off with my daughter, and I don't like him. It's really interesting that Hannah admits that some of the affidavits, they were a little bit suspect, but as Dan Vogel explains in his commentary on Mormonism Unveiled, and he references other Mormon historians who all say that this is in good history. This does need to be taken into the wider context. We're not just going to pay attention to just Mormonism Unveiled, but this does provide a wider context of what Joseph Smith said. And then you add to that Isaac Hale's affidavit. It's really interesting that she admits that she does believe that that's legit. Let's read let's read what he said. Let's read what is the affidavit that Hannah just said is legit. The same girl who just said like a few minutes ago, find me a source. Hey Hannah, quick question. Can we use sources that you say are legit in the same video? Affidavit of Isaac Hale, March 20th, 1834, reprinted in E.D. Howe's Mormonism Unveiled. I first became acquainted with Joseph Smith Jr. in November 1825. He was at that time an employee of a set of men who were called money diggers, and his occupation was that of seeing or pretending to see by means of a stone placed in a hat, and his hat placed closely over his face. In this way, he pretended to discover minerals and hidden treasure. His appearance at this time was that of careless young man, not well educated, and very saucy and insolent to his father. Smith and his father, with several other money diggers, boarded at my house while they were employed in digging for a mine that they supposed had been opened and worked by the Spaniards many years since. Young Smith gave the money diggers great encouragement at first, but when they had arrived at digging to near the place where they had stated an immense treasure would be found, he said the enchantment was so powerful that he could not see, and then he became discouraged and soon after dispersed. This took place about the 17th of November, 1825, and one of the company gave his note for $12 for his board, which is still unpaid. Then his future wife, Emma's father, says how he was like, I know my daughter was a total babe, but I didn't. First I thought this treasure digging stuff was legit. Then I realized that it was a fraud. And then he tried to run up with my daughter. And I was like, you don't even have a real job. And he's like, yeah, I know, I'll get a real job. So he goes back home and he writes the Book of Mormon with the same rock on the hat method. Hannah, do you hear what you just said? Richard Bushman, church historian, cannot be trusted. Famous church historian, author of Breaststone Rolling, takes Joseph Smith off of a pedestal. How dare he? Where is he getting his information from? Joseph Smith's father-in-law, Isaac Hale. There you go, Hannah. This satanic power to show you sources that you already agree are legit is just flowing through me right now. I hope that you can now take down all of your things that say Joseph Smith wasn't a treasure digger. I played by your rules. I only went with sources that you find legitimate. And all the sources, I still have more to show, are not pulled from Mormonism Unveiled, but I tried to find only sources that you agree with, that you would find legitimate. And so I found one that you just said was legit. Well, what do you think? I wonder if at some point in this video, listen, hear me out. I wonder if, you know what I really hope? I hope that at some point in this video, Hannah will say something that really just shows that, like, if Joseph Smith was a treasure digger, if that was proven to be true and she could accept it, like, let's say that she said a source would be legit, and then in that source that she said was legit, it said that he was a treasure digger. I wonder if she would say that if he was a treasure digger, then that disqualifies him from being a prophet, because that is mixed up with Satanism and the occult, and therefore he couldn't have been a prophet. And those two things she would be able to put together and say, oh, my standard that somebody who is a prophet, my only standard by which I decipher basically if somebody's a prophet is if they do things that are satanic, that are counterfeit and opposite of God, that if the person I call a prophet does those things, could he just not be a prophet? Do you think, like, maybe at some point in this video, she'll be like, if he thinks he was a prophet doing that stuff, I Hannah Stoddard, have had more spiritual experiences than that. He's not a prophet. I'm more of a prophet than him.
Sally Chase, who was the sister to Willard Chase, the village witch, who was looking in her occultic glass to find the plates, right? So wait, really? And then hold on, everyone. Let's remember the time. 1826. When did Joseph Smith have the first vision? 1820, 6 years before. So you're telling me that Joseph Smith entered the presence of the Father and the Son, spoke to them personally. Greatest vision in recorded history. Visions that none of us in this room are even worthy to have ourselves. Joseph Smith has that at 14. He understands what the power of God is. He knows God's kingdom. He knows things about God's authority and his priesthood that none of us can even comprehend. And then 6 years later, he's hanging out with the village witch. Like, and this is at the same time he's preparing to get the plates. Like, this makes no sense. If this is who Joseph Smith is, I am sorry. I lose all my respect for him because I have a better understanding of spiritual experiences than he ever could.
And I guess
You go, Hannah. Yeah, girl. You have a better reach on spiritual experiences. You actually probably do. Your spiritual experiences are probably not telling you to bang teenagers. So congratulations on that. I was hoping, it was just like I had an itch. I had a hunch that at some point she would just pedestalize Joseph to a point that he couldn't even reach anymore. So by Hannah's own standard, if Joseph Smith was hanging out with the witch, which he was, if he was getting his seer stone in which to defraud farmers out of their money by doing this folk magic treasure digging practice with a rock that he got from the neighborhood witch, if that's the story of Joseph Smith, then that is not a prophet that I want to follow. Hannah, I couldn't agree more. There's this Isaac Hale, and he's a newspaper editor in Kirtland, Ohio, minding his own fudging business. And then the Saints are driven out of wherever they were. I'm not a freaking historian. I don't know. The Mormons, they move into Kirtland, Ohio. Sidney Rigdon is like the big minister, the big preacher in town. And the missionaries come in and they convert like most of the people in the town to Mormonism. And Isaac Hale's this newspaper editor. And you can just imagine this like a movie where he's like, what is this Twilight Zone thing where like there's all these like Night of the Undead, there's all these Mormons walking around my town? Isaac Hale's like, are they like Masons? Why are they being so secretive? They're having all of their meetings at night, and they're like closing all the windows. They're acting super secretive. And Isaac Hale, with this newspaper editor, he's like, well, one thing I know is I don't like Masons, and they sure are acting a lot like Masons. He didn't even know about the temple ceremony yet, okay? And all the other churches, you can walk right in, but the Mormons are being so secretive because they were being so extreme, and had like all of the early church leaders are like, yeah, we had to keep all our meetings secret because if they knew what we were up to, people would like call us blasphemers and like want to drink our blood. So it's just interesting that they admit that like we were being so secretive because we would have been killed for it. And all the people in the town are like, what are you guys up to? Like, and so Isaac Hale's like, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And so he does like help facilitate Flastus Hurlbut to like go get these affidavits, be like, where do they come from? What's this Joseph Smith been up to? And Flastus Hurlbut's like, I'm gonna go find out. There's some whispers that he's been treasure digging and doing a bunch of nefarious stuff. That's why they had to run from where they came from into Kirtland, Ohio. So the people just want answers. The Mormons are being very secretive. It goes back up to New York and stuff, and he's like, so you grew up next to Joseph Smith. You got defrauded. You were a farmer. You got defrauded by Joseph Smith. You knew the family growing up. Scribble, 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 and writes down all these affidavits. And then I'll get into in a second what Joseph and Oliver Cowdery say about the affidavits. And it's really interesting what they say, but more interesting about what they don't say. What they don't say about the parts that talk about treasure digging, because his affidavits have a whole wide range of just the Joseph Smith family, where like New York white trash, like all of us, we just don't want people to look up what we were doing in high school and in college and stuff. Whether you were in your like early 20s messing around with the occult, or you just had braces, like you don't like people digging into your past,
On Joseph Smith and Joseph Smith's family. So he goes back east, he goes and he starts talking to the neighbors and everything else. And like Brandon said, there's debate. Like, did he even really talk to some of the neighbors? Some people later said they came to him, but they wouldn't give him what he wanted to hear. So he walks away. But he gathers up all this information. He brings it back to Ohio. Before he can get it published, he gets convicted in court for threatening Joseph Smith's life. Okay. So it's a huge, they have a huge trial. This is in the Joseph Smith papers. Joseph Smith's praying. His life is on the line.
What was Joseph Smith praying about? So Joseph Smith and the Saints, they're out there in Kirtland, Ohio, and the bitterness of Hurlbut's criticisms resulted in Joseph Smith complaining to the justice of the peace, and the justice said, like, okay, just get these Mormons off my back. And he's just like, all right, you've urged me to take action. We're going to take action. And so a preliminary hearing was held, and Joseph Smith wrote in his journal, This is his prayer. My soul delighteth in the law of the Lord, for he forgiveth my sins and will confound mine enemies. The Lord shall destroy him who has lifted his heel against me, even that wicked man, Dr. P. Hurlbut. He will deliver him to the fowls of heaven, and his bones shall be cast up to the best of the wind. And he lifted his arm against the Almighty, therefore the Lord shall destroy him. And like all he's really being accused of is like being white trash, basically. So it's hard to say what Joseph Smith said, because he did feel threatened, because Flaccus Hurlbut comes back and he starts giving all of these sermons, and now he's like armed with all of these affidavits where he's like, all right, you guys want to know about the truth about Mormonism? I'm here to tell you the truth about Mormonism. This is what his neighbors had to say. And people are like, tell me all about it. So yeah, he's stoking like this anti-Mormon fear in the town of Kirtland, where people are like, oh, he was involved with the occult. Oh, he was a con man. Oh, and he's in our fair city of Kirtland, Ohio. We've got trouble a brewing here. And you have to really think about Mormons and the persecution complex that they've always had has to come in contact with what a political powerhouse that they've always been. So when you understand that in context, you understand the persecution, you understand why people were suspicious, and then you understand why Joseph Smith didn't want to talk about all of the stuff from his treasure digging past. And so Joseph Smith even said to his brother Hiram Smith, who was like, can we get some more information about like how the Book of Mormon was created? And Joseph Smith's like, it was never supposed to be revealed how the Book of Mormon was created to the outside world. Like, direct quote from Joseph Smith. Okay.
So basically, by now he is so his reputation is so tarnished, he can't publish the material under his own name. So he gives it to a man named E.D. Howe, who publishes it. E.D. Howe, I'm trying to remember if it was his sister or his wife. A relative was actually a member of the church, and I'd actually given him
E.D. Howe's wife and his wife's sister converted to Mormonism. So E.D. Howe is like, are they in my bed right now? Like, what the? E.D. Howe is like, he literally turns over and there's Mormons there. Like, he is spooked, okay? Give the man a break.
The money to Joseph Smith. He is opposed to Joseph Smith. So he publishes Mormonism Unveiled under his name. And these are the main sources. So like when you hear there was a man named Willard Chase, and Willard Chase said that Joseph Smith found his first seer stone while digging a well for Willard Chase, that's coming from Mormonism Unveiled. Who was Willard Chase? Willard Chase is literally the man who led the banditti to steal the plates from Joseph Smith, attacked him. His sister was a witch.
This is the things that they leave out. There's so much more context I can get into here. Okay. He's talking about Sally Chase, that his sister, Willard Chase. There was this whole clan of people who were money diggers in the town that Joseph Smith grew up in, okay? And Willard Chase and him used to be friends until Joseph Smith got, too much of an ego and started stealing his business, basically. But for Joseph Smith to even be a treasure digger in the first place, to even know Willard Chase, to even know his sister Sally Chase, guess how they knew that? They knew each other through treasure digging. They were mutual, like, allies and friends in the treasure digging biz, okay? And that for Joseph Smith to even get the stone that is in the church vault right now, that is on the church archives website. So like, this is what doesn't make sense about Hannah Stoddard, because there are certain things that we know. This is not, this cannot be twisted by progressive historians. We know that there is a rock that sits in the church, that's on the church's website, as the rock that Joseph Smith used for his treasure digging, as well as his translation of the Book of Mormon with a stone in the hat. That's what they say. Okay. Whether you believe he put it in a stone as a hat and the degree to which he translated the Book of Mormon with that is irrelevant for what I'm trying to say here. But the fact that there was a stone in a hat that he used for some type of superstitious folk magic at any point in his life, the very way that he got that stone was by asking Sally Chase if he could look at her stone. And then he's like, you know what I see in your stone? I see my stone. Find the stone. The very stone that they have was discovered through witchery, through witchcraft. The very stone that that Hannah would have to admit. Her entire point is that Joseph Smith could not have been involved in witchcraft. That's opposite. That's not doctrinal. But the very stone that the church has in its archives was discovered through hanging out with his friend Sally Chase, who she just said is a witch. So what is it? Like, it's
Unveiled came out, the first presidency made a statement and said it was the most ridiculous stories that could be invented, and a few affidavits. Oliver Cowdery writes his letters to W.W. Phelps, literally responding to this, saying this is nonsense, this is crazy, these are accusations against Joseph Smith's character.
Yes, they wrote a response, but the response that Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith wrote that is found in this is in the Latter-day Saint Messenger and Advocate, October 1834, New Witness for Christ, Oliver Cowdery's final installment of the response to Mormonism Unveiled. And I have all of these links below, and you can read this entire thing. It's like 40, 60 pages where Joseph Smith has the opportunity to say, I was not a treasure digger. Watch what he says. He only responds very generally. Oliver goes to all of this effort of saying what a hardworking man his cousin Joseph Smith is, but on the claim that he was money digging, he doesn't deny that claim. So contrary to Hannah's claim that you have to just look at these sources and you'll see that all of them, anything that you want to hear about Joseph Smith and his treasure digging is all going to come from Mormonism Unveiled. Ha 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 ha. So in my research, I have found this article called The Mature Joseph Smith and Treasure Searching. And this is by a faithful Mormon, Richard Lloyd Anderson, who's a lawyer, theologist for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who is a professor of church history and doctrine at Brigham Young University. And if he's also really wary of sources like Mormonism Unveiled, but he does think that Joseph was a treasure digger, I wanted to know, well, what are his sources? So in this slide, there's some important years to pay attention to. So Joseph Smith obtained the plates in 1827, recorded revelations in 1828, and the Book of Mormon was published in 1830. So are there sources that some who have a bias or don't have a bias would throw out because they're historically flawed and, written down years later and have an axe to grind with Joseph Smith or just hearsay? Yes, probably. So the question at hand is, was Joseph Smith a money digger? Can that be laid out without flawed testimony, written at the time by people in the church? Can it be written out in court documents by a judge and scribes in a courtroom and not hearsay? Because as Richard L. Anderson points out, all the way back in 1984 when this was published, that Joseph Smith, he was a treasure digger, but maybe not to the extent that some people say or think that he is, but he says that he was. And then he says that he was most likely not involved in it after 1827, but that he was indeed a treasure digger. And Anderson even gets talking in this account about all the history that he is throwing out because of Hurlbut was just this, one of a kind negative testimony, but he still admits that the evidence is there. And Oliver Cowdery, Joseph's cousin, the scribe to the Book of Mormon, was there during his treasure digging days, and that he played apologist for him as they tried to change and do damage control after Mormonism Unveiled. So let's read. This is Joseph Smith responding to what people were saying about his past before moving the church to Kirtland and the need of accurate information to convince the public of the incorrectness of those scurrilous reports which have inundated our land. During this time, as it is common in most youths, I fell into many vices and follies. But as my accusers are and have been forward to accuse me of being guilty of gross, outrageous violations of peace and good order of the community, I take no occasion to remark, I have not, neither can it be sustained in truth, been guilty of a wrongdoing or injuring any man or society of men, and those imperfections to which I allude, and for which I have often had occasion to lament, were a light and too often vain-minded, exhibiting a foolish and trifling conversation. So he says that what he means by trifling conversations, which has nothing to do with speech, but the people back then, they were talking about actions, which basically in old-timey language means improper activity. So what activity was the prophet confessing? The affidavits are a guide, for the repeated charges were threefold. The Smiths were a lying and indolent set of men, so saying that they're lazy and don't want to exert themselves, all right? And the general employment of the family was digging for money. That's what the affidavits in Mormonism Unveiled are saying, that the Smiths are responding. Oliver is playing apologist on, that's the other charge. Lying, laziness, and money digging were woven into the Hurlbut's affidavits. In 1834, Joseph Smith stressed that he had not injured the community, which most obviously denies lying. We know historically that neither he nor his family were guilty of indolence or laziness. So the major charge left is the money digging, which certainly fits Joseph Smith's acknowledgement of trifling conversation, meaning trivial activity. Such general language could fit other youthful follies as well, but money digging is the glaring visible charge not expressly challenged. But then Oliver even mentions Joseph's trial and being charged of a disorderly person, which I will get into a second when Hannah mentions that. Sit tight. The trial is very important evidence. And then down there at the bottom, it says that Joseph Smith's response to Howe had only been general, but Oliver was more specific, even mentioning Joseph Smith's trial and acquittal on the charge of being a disorderly person sometime previous to obtaining the records of the Nephites. As already mentioned, notations and fees of this case have surfaced along with later recollections about it. There's also a record of a highly condensed selections of Joseph's testimony. I could literally be here all day pointing out Mormon church historians who are opposed to Mormonism Unveiled, who do not like the affidavits, but still want to show what the response was and what is Joseph admitting to and what is he not admitting to. So Hannah's like, Joseph Smith was not a treasure digger. I dare you to tell me one source. This is what's so fun. So this is my favorite. This is like the funnest. This is just fun for me. I dare someone to find me one source that says Joseph Smith was a treasure digger, and you can't use Mormonism Unveiled, except the affidavit from Emma Smith's dad was legit, where it says he's a treasure digger. That's point one. Point two, she says that Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith went out and they had to respond to Mormonism Unveiled, and Oliver Cowdery wrote this big, long response to it. Oliver Cowdery responds to each of the charges most repeated in the affidavits: laziness, lying, and money digging. He introduces his rebuttals in consequence of certain false and slanderous reports which have been circulated. For by some, he said, is to have been lazy, idle, vicious, profligate fellow. I don't know what that word. So Oliver goes on to say in his rebuttal that, like, you think he's lying and he's idle and he's lazy. I have personal experience with him, and the entire family is included in this affidavit. And so he's like, I know the Smith family. These are all lies. And then it says towards the bottom, Oliver Cowdery also defends their honesty and industry, admitting their poverty, and that, he'd been in his home and in their neighborhood since 1828. And if this isn't an admission by Oliver Cowdery, you know what? You tell me. But it does feel like we have so many church historians who say that Joseph Smith was a treasure digger, and we don't want to listen to Mormonism Unveiled. We want to see what the church's response was to it. And we can handle the idea that he was a money digger. We just won't sit by and say that he was idle or lazy or any of that, because that for sure does not fit into the context of this industrious person that we know Joseph Smith to be, like who we want to emulate. But we can find a way to nuance the treasure digging and think of it as a preparatory gospel. And that's the whole point of this article, is that he's admitting that to some degree, Joseph Smith was absolutely treasure digging. And then Richard L. Anderson goes on to make the point towards the end of this article about the preparatory gospel that he does get into, which I can explain in a second. But he says that when people are like, hey, wasn't like Joseph Smith's own father-in-law name, like, didn't he have an affidavit saying that he was a treasure digger? It says that Oliver skirts this issue, claiming exaggeration because of that project. Joseph was accused of digging down all, or nearly so, the mountains of the Susquehanna, or causing others to do it by some art of necromancy. Here Joseph's apologist, referring to Oliver Cowdery doing his dirty work for him, does exactly what Joseph had done earlier. He vigorously contradicts the claims of dishonesty and indolence, but does not specifically deny the treasure digging. Indeed, Oliver goes into some detail on Stoll's Spanish mind, but then trails off with a hint that there is more that could be told. Quote, this, I believe, is the substance so far if my memory serves, though I shall not pledge my veracity to the correctness of the account as I have given. Oliver thus avoids a full history of how Joseph's group was excavating the earth and pursuing this treasure, but his point is that detail is irrelevant. Joseph is now worthy appellation. I'm probably getting so many words wrong. Sorry, they're old-timey. Of a seer stone, and to be prophet of the Lord, even though he is a man subject to passions like any other man, beset with infirmities and encompassed with weakness. The sentence brings the evidence full circle, for Oliver is really paraphrasing what Joseph said about himself pre-1827 years. Both stress that the real issue is not what Joseph was, but what he became. Both talk of Joseph's earlier questionable pursuits and equate them with imperfections and weakness, but both tactfully admit Joseph's money digging as a past irrelevant activity. They admit that it was an activity that he did. Am I using enough of your own sources yet, Hannah, for your liking? So Joseph got the golden plates out of the ground in 1827, but both Oliver and Joseph say that the money digging that he did before he got the golden plates is irrelevant because he was only on training wheels doing that stuff with his seer stone. And now he's using that seer stone for profit stuff. So while Hannah and this faction of stuff, they all have this gigantic conspiracy about the traditionalist view versus the progressive view, because the progressive voted for FDR, and you know what a socialist, evil, loser liberal he is for getting us out of the Great Depression. You know, that loser who, like, my parents have Social Security checks now because of all based on this progressive idea that Leonard Arrington and all the more progressive faction, that the only reason you think that he was treasure digging is because of what these progressive church historians have to say, instead of just accepting that that is what they just said right there, that this at least was a preparatory gospel of him doing some occult stuff and, you know, killing a dog and doing the spiritual enchantment stuff. At least we can make a plausible argument. Hannah Stoddard still says no. She says, no, 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 no. Baby say, yeah, 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 yeah. And then obviously this is just funny. So like the extent of the activity is hard to know, as Richard L. Anderson says, but in Dan Vogel's book, he shows the 18 different treasure digs that are all mapped out. And so the tall tales that are collected by Hurlbut are skeptical to him, because he, just like, you know, all these other Mormon apologists, they have to smear Hurlbut as this twice excommunicated fornicator, like in the video I did with Bill Reel a couple weeks ago. That's what they call him. They need to smear him. So he wasn't, though. And the stuff that Hurlbut collected, that it might be exaggerated, sure, but Joseph was a treasure digger right up until 1827, says everyone. This is not a sacred cow of academia. This is every single possible source at every different angle says that that's what he was doing, down to Joseph Smith's father-in-law, a source that you, Hannah, say is legit, and down to Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery himself, when given pages and pages and pages to write a response to Mormonism Unveiled, they only go over the response to him being lazy. That, like, all of the responses have to do with his family being lazy and neglecting. And then Lucy Mack Smith and Oliver Cowdery are out here just doing clapbacks. They're like, that you're calling us lazy treasure diggers. Do you know how hard it is to dig all day? Like, that is literally the point of Oliver Cowdery and all of, like, the family's responses. Okay.
Right.
Well, let me give you one thing. So we're talking here about, the Smith family was all involved in supposedly folk magic to some degree, right? Okay. So I come through one of the Smith's line. I come through Joseph Smith's cousin, Silas Sanford Smith. I will tell you, there is not one shred of evidence in any of the Smith families or the cousins, in their private letters, in their journals, nothing, no kind of folk magic language, no kind of, private letter from Jesse Smith to so-and-so saying, we did this, or have you looked into
a Ouija board to the party on Friday night or whatever, right?
Not even like the vocabulary or the lingo.
Satanic occult hat. If only you want me to go to the Joseph Smith papers, but those are of God. Well, I guess we better go to the Joseph Smith papers. The collection of everything that are of all of the writings of Joseph Smith and all of the documents of his family. Surely we won't find letters from Jesse Smith, Joseph's uncle, his Joseph Smith Sr.'s brother, to anybody in the Smith family about their treasure digging. Surely we won't find anything that completely is the opposite of what Hannah just said. The thing that Hannah said didn't exist in any letters from Jesse Smith that she named specifically. It's almost as if she knows that it exists, and she said that it doesn't exist, because in her mind she said, I don't like that crumple, and she threw it away. To the Joseph Smith papers. 1829. Letter from Jesse Smith to Hiram Smith. Once I thought my promising nephew. So he just rails into him. So a couple of her points were that Christians were totally angry at Joseph Smith for doing all this occult stuff. There were some Christians who were doing occult stuff, that they thought that those two things worked together in their spiritualism interpretation. And there are some Christians who were like, I don't like any part of it. One's like you, Hannah. So this is a kind of hilarious, old-timey, scathing letter from an uncle who's like, you have betrayed our family. I don't want to talk to you. I know what you've been up to, and you're out of the will. I hate your guts. Tell your dad hi for me, though. So Jesse Smith, Uncle Jesse, his house is full of rage. Once I thought, my promising nephew, you wrote my father long ago, and after struggling through various scenes of adversity, you and your family, you had last been taught the very salutary lesson that the God that made the heavens and the earth would at once give success to your endeavors. If this is true, it is very well, exactly as it should be. But alas, what is man when left to his own way? Saying, you've turned away from God. You could have had great success, but I've been hearing what you guys have been up to. He makes his own God, a golden calf. He falls down and worships before it and says, this is my God, which brought me out of the land of Vermont. I love it. I was like, the land of Israel? Vermont. If it be a gold book discovered by the necromancy of infidelity and dug up from the mines of atheism, he writes that the angel of the Lord has revealed him to hidden treasures of wisdom and knowledge, even divine revelations, which he has laid at the bowels of the earth for thousands of years, is at last made known to him. He is saying, you are turned away from God, and through your necromancy, you and your brother are making your own way in the world. If you would have just trusted God, you don't have to go inventing some new effing religion. I'm on to you. I'm your uncle. I know that you don't have these magic powers that you claim to have and that you're starting this new religion. Hello? Is at last made known to him. He says he has eyes to see things that are not, and that he has the audacity to say that they are. Do you think I don't know what you're up to? Like, you're saying you can see things under the earth that aren't there. And this angel of the Lord, devil it should be, talking about Moroni, I think, has put me in possession of great wealth, gold and silver and precious stones, so that I shall have the dominion of all of the land of Palmyra. In a subsequent letter, you write that you learned from your grandfather's letter that Uncle Jesse Smith thinks you are carrying on a work of deception. All right, gets even juicier. So he says, in another letter that you write, that you learned from your grandfather's letter, that Uncle Jesse Smith, talking about himself, thinks you're carrying on a work of deception in this, carrying on a work of deception. In this, he and you are right. This is where it gets really juicy. He really gives it to him. In this, he and you are right. Uncle Jesse did and still does think the whole pretended discovery, not a very deep, but a very clear and foolish deception, is very great wickedness, unpardonable, unless you are shielded by your ignorance. So unless you went around thinking unless you're just stupid and think that you actually can get away with this, you are wicked, and this is an unpardonable sin. So you're either pure evil or you're just stupid, is what he says about the restorers of the gospel, the restorers of the one true church. Again, you say, if you are deceived, God is your deceiver. Blasphemous wretch, how dare you utter such a sentence? How dare you harbor such a thought? Is he like harboring a hoe? I like the way he spelled thought. Anyway, you never did think so, but be hardened in iniquity. You made us use the holy name of Jehovah for what? Why? To cover your nefarious designs and impose on the credulity of your grandfather, one of the oldest men on earth, blackness of darkness. He's like running out of synonyms and he's just spewing stuff. He's like, you have brought great shame on this family, the shame of blackness of darkness. So Hannah Stoddard, descendant of Joseph Smith, I guess you were like, Jesse Smith, he just never wrote that, because I'm sure you're aware that he wrote that.
Am I mistaken on, doesn't Lucy Mack Smith in a journal talk about circle magic at some point?
Okay, so that statement we've completely shredded. It's on our website.
Really?
That is the biggest manipulation of her source if you go read it in context. And actually,
well, tell us, how is it the big manipulation? Hit us.
So I don't have it all right here in front of me, but basically what she says is actually the opposite, where she says, I'm switching my theme now. So she's sitting down to tell her story. When she gets to the part about the angel Moroni, remember in context, Mormonism Unveiled has been out for over a decade at this point, plus a million other anti-Mormon publications. And everyone is saying that the minute you start talking about angels or anything, bam, you are into Satanism. So she says, I'm getting ready to talk about the coming forth of the Book of Mormon and the Angel Moroni. She says, let not my reader suppose that when I go into this history, that means our family stopped working on our farm. I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but it's on the LDSanswers.org website. You can just type in Lucy Mack Smith, it will come up. But she says, don't think,
no. Okay, keep going.
but she says, don't think that we stopped all of our labor and got into the abracadabra and the magic circles and da-da-da-da-da. And then she starts talking about the Angel Moroni. She never said, oh, we did this, or this was part of our culture, like nothing. There's nothing. She's saying, before I even start getting into spiritual experiences, I'm drawing a line right here. Don't think it's what you've heard, that our family was involved in X, Y, and Z. And then she moves on. You never see a shred of any of even the language or anything to suggest this was part of their family culture.
And so sweet Hannah, she is trying so hard. You could see in that clip that Midnight Mormons is like, oh, that has been refuted, that, Lucy Mack Smith, she didn't admit to like seances and stuff. She's like, oh, we have torn that apart. It's been torn to pieces in its context. Then she goes on and talks for like 5 minutes straight about a context that has nothing to do with anything. So going back to Richard L. Anderson's paper, this is at the very bottom. He says, Father Joseph Smith followed this tradition of being religiously lost, finding solutions, and being promised more. Mother Lucy Mack Smith also fit into this group of individualists. Receiving deep assurance through her private prayers, she first investigated Methodism and prayed for her husband's soul when he resisted. In a midlife, she affiliated with Presbyterianism, again without him. This family illustrates the climate of biblical searching, a more constant influence on young Joseph than patterns of folk magic. So he doesn't say the only influence. He admits that it's just a more constant influence is the Presbyterianism, is the Methodism, right? Lucy Mack Smith reacted to accusations by considering treasure rights incidental to the deep quest for religion that was their overriding family's concern. So nobody doubts that people in that day and age, Joseph's family absolutely included, that they're all searching for what the one true church was, right? That's how the church is restored. That's deeply integral to their family's life. How does that, there's no way, the way that we already know Joseph Smith's family's life and the way that people lived back then, there's no way that you can say that folk magic couldn't have just fit into that just because you don't want it to. Noting reports that the Smiths were preoccupied with magic circles or soothsaying, she bypassed the subject as trivial without affirming or denying. Quote, we never during our lives suffered one important interest to swallow up every other obligation. That's the quote. That's the quote. Although the quote often stops there in negative literature, Lucy's next sentence completed her thought that her time was mainly used in religious seeking. But whilst we work with our hands, we endeavored to remember the service of and the welfare of our souls. So just for also other further context, Lucy Mack Smith's autobiography, when it came out, it really upset Brigham Young. And when he knew that it was released, he wanted all of the copies burned and destroyed. And then he had the church leadership go in there. And I can't remember the exact amount, but they took out like 700 words and added like 400 words. And so you can read the different versions of it. And it just is really interesting that it just leaves you a little suspicious, because you're like, what was it that you guys wanted to take out and wanted to add back in? And most of the things are of what Brigham Young, after Joseph Smith died, what he wanted the narrative to be. So when Lucy Mack Smith is directly asked about the magic and the soothsayings in her own autobiography in the original versions, before Brigham Young has his hands on it, she says that we were just always like, don't think that we were just like obsessed with the occult. Like we were always interested in the welfare of our souls. And if you guys heard that we were lazy, don't you dare think it. Like, you really have to understand that all of the rebuttals really come down to not wanting to be called lazy. And when they have the opportunity to deny it, she doesn't deny it. So I don't know what Hannah's thinking, that they can like shred this apart. That she literally just says that it didn't overtake their life. But like, Yeah, that's like a thing that we dabbled in. And as this historian summarizes everything that he knows about Joseph Smith and everything that I read about Joseph Smith, I think that is very accurate to say that the family illustrates the climate of biblical searching as a more constant influence on young Joseph than patterns of folk magic. That is, they're reading from the Bible. They're still in a Christian community. It's not like folk magic TV 24/7 necessarily, but it absolutely was an aspect of their life. So are you guys keeping count yet? Where Hannah Stoddard cannot just extract what the author is trying to say and what all of the historians all agree is what is being said by the author, where she completely spins something to say that it says the opposite because it's what she wants it to say. Isn't this fascinating?
Like, let's just say, let's move forward with the conversation, because I know that's where you're headed, of like saying, okay, well, what if it is legit?
Yeah.
And we can go down that road.
Yeah.
I just want to just help people when people are like, it's so solid. Our case is solid. Like, this is non-debatable. The case is closed. Really? Because are we really sitting here having this conversation saying the best we've got is Mormonism Unveiled and artifacts that we don't even know for sure if Joseph Smith had, let alone why did he have them? Did someone give them to him? Did he use them? Was it something he was looking at like Freemasonry and says, this is apostate, I'm replacing it? We have no idea. So we can have a conversation. Well, what if it's legit? And I'm fine to have that conversation, but let's at least acknowledge that we're having a conversation about sources that are extremely, extremely debatable, and it's very uncertain.
Nobody's saying that. Not Richard Bushman, not any of the church historians. Nobody is saying that the best that they've got is Mormonism Unveiled, as I think I have demonstrated so far and will continue to demonstrate. That is just like, I don't know, a bold-faced lie. Nobody's saying that. The case is solid for a myriad of other reasons. It's hard. Yeah, it's really debatable. The sources are really hard. I only want to have legit sources, Hannah. So could you point me some legit sources? Oh, the affidavit from Emma Smith's dad. Okay, I read that one. Is there any other legit sources? If there was anything in your family's journals or letters or anything about the magic, could that be the Uncle Jesse one? So we've got that source because you're like, there's nothing in there. And so we have that source. Is there anything from Joseph Smith himself and Oliver Cowdery, like when they're responding to what people said about their family, did he like flatly deny it, or did he like kind of tiptoe around it and say like, yeah, that was kind of a thing that I dabbled in, but I'm like, over it, and it was just a preparatory gospel? So we do have that. And then would it be helpful if, like, when Joseph's mom is writing an autobiography, that she says like, hey, I know you think that we're all into the occult and it overtook our life. It only overtook some of our life because we were not lazy. We still took care of our farm and we still did Christian stuff, but don't think that it was just the only thing it was the thing that we did. It just wasn't the only thing that we did. Would those 4 sources be enough? Or are you just going to discount all of them? They exist and say Mormonism Unveiled. Really? You're telling me? And it's just, there's so many people watching this in the comments who are like, you tell them, Hannah. She's got that Ben Shapiro effect where she just talks so fast into the camera. Hey, Kara, don't you do that too? I have sources. I have evidence. All right. I just am also the youngest child. So just, that's a thing that just has to exist. And I was trained on TikTok to talk fast. All right. Just let that be. But she's doing that thing where people in the comments are just like, she sounds so confident that she must be telling the truth. She's absolutely flatly, completely lying, or at least obfuscating and trying to confuse people by saying that these sources don't exist when she knows that they exist. I have read this book, and she has reasons why she discounts anything that says that Joseph Smith was not near perfect. And if in her mind, him being involved in the occult and treasure digging is not perfect, she says in her book she will discount it, because the source has to come from Satan. All right. So then, to Kwaku's credit, which I don't give a lot, because if you can remember those responses to the CES letter videos that Kwaku and Cardin and them that they did a while ago for Fair Mormon that were so bad that they got taken down because their arguments and comedy were so laughable. There is a point in Kwaku's apologetic response to the CES letter where Kwaku says, like, he likes the magic. He's like, you've already accepted that that a glowing angel comes and delivers, these plates and takes them away from Joseph Smith. Is it really that hard to believe X, Y, and Z from that? That once you submit to this magical thinking, it's just cool. Like, it's awesome. Like, just submit to that there's magical thinking in our church. That's so cool. And so Kwaku is consistent on that. And then he goes on to kind of counter back to Hannah and says,
to me, it doesn't seem out of place. The translation of the Book of Mormon, I mean, Urim and Thummim, that is magic. The golden plates, I mean, they appear and disappear by the angel's will. That's magic. Brigham Young's bloodstone, that's probably the most occult.
She's seething right now. She's like... So then Hannah wants to come back and answer that to Kwaku's point. Can somebody be working for God and also working for Satan? So I know this video is really long, but we're seriously just getting into my favorite part of it. So watch what she says.
I think the main conversation needs to be, could someone be involved with, so we have to set down what we're talking about here, right? So if we're talking about real forces. So, and this is something that the adversary doesn't want, or secularism, right, doesn't want us to acknowledge. So the devil has power, and that power is real. God also has power, and that power is real. You guys brought up a bunch of like biblical examples, 100%, right? So the question is, can those two forces be compatible with each other or used together? I do not believe scripturally you can support that conclusion. They're very different. They're in opposition to one another. I mean, if you just even look at the Book of Mormon, the way Mormon references witchcraft and magic, it's like you destroy it. New Testament, what happens when they go and they
soothsayers,
right, they convert all these people. What do? They take their magic books and they burn them. What happened to Hiram Page's stone? It's a second or third hand account from Martin Harris's brother, but it says Joseph Smith had that stone ground to powder and all of the writings burnt. It's anything that has anything to do with the devil is destroyed. We don't touch it. And this is why, because so God has a kingdom, God has a priesthood. Everything the devil does, and we see this in the temple, is to mimic it and create an opposite, right? And it's everything to oppose it. So the one fundamental difference between the priesthood and magic, and I think those terms are important. So, for example, we can talk about Joseph Smith's seer stones. Brigham Young talked about how Urim and Thummim and seer stones are actually a part of the Aaronic priesthood. So we're not talking about something that's just, it's amoral and you just find it and you use it and whatever. No, this is contingent upon priesthood authority. And what is priesthood authority contingent on? Keys, right? I mean, otherwise we're getting into divergent group territory where it's like, go start your own church. You can marry anybody you want. You can do whatever you want. No, there's order, there's the authority. It's also based on righteousness. You cannot exercise the power of God without righteousness.
Use the Leohono when your family is sinning.
Right. That's totally different.
And I think they go on and counter her claim and say that, like, how could Joseph Smith be using his seer stones with a priesthood that he hadn't even restored yet? I don't know if they made that point, but I'll make that point because that's true. Because the restoration of the priesthood came long after Joseph Smith even got the plates out of the hill, if he did, right? So that point, that doesn't make any sense, because if you're saying that God has order and that if he was using the Urim and Thummim and the seer stones whatsoever, he has an order to it. He has to restore the church first, and then he gets the priesthood later on down the line. Well, Joseph Smith wasn't using his seer stones when he had the priesthood. And then she goes on to say, well, like there's different levels of he knew he was going to get the priesthood. Like he still had like the spirit. Does that count and stuff? Like, hey, does that count? If I'm a woman, can I give a spirit blessing that's the exact same as a priesthood blessing? No, I can't. So by your own terms, you admit that the priesthood is a thing that has keys that has to be restored from Peter, James, and John, bestowing that like Melchizedek and Aaronic priesthood through Joseph Smith. And then every single person, you can have Sunday school lessons in church. Like I remember growing up in my home ward in Provo, Utah, and my bishop was Dallin this Dallin Oaks Jr., basically the son of Dallin H. Oaks, who is like the second in command, like of the about to be prophet guy right now. And he would say like, the church is in order, and I know where I got my priesthood from when I was 12 years old, and I know where my dad got it from, and like the person who gave it to me, and then he can mark where he got it from, and then down the line he knows that he got it from such and such who got it directly from Joseph Smith. That is an important part of Mormonism, is that authority, that you can only act in the name of God with the priesthood by the laying on of hands by somebody in a position of authority who has the righteousness to bestow that on, you know, a man when he's 12, 14, and 16, and so on like that. By one hand, it's just the weakest of arguments that Hannah's like, you can only, these stones only work if you have the priesthood, but the priesthood, he didn't have the priesthood yet. Then I want to go back and play this clip one more time. And then I want you to listen again to exactly what she says here, because I had thought of a bunch of examples. Why don't you guys think of some examples too? Write them in the comments.
So I think the main conversation needs to be, could someone be involved with, so we have to set down what we're talking about here, right? So if we're talking about real forces. So, and this is something that the adversary doesn't want, or secularism, right, doesn't want us to acknowledge. So the devil power is real. God also has power, and that power is real. You guys brought up a bunch of like biblical examples, 100%, right? So the question is, can those two forces be compatible with each other or used together? I do not believe scripturally you can support that conclusion. They're very different.
They're very different. Does not believe that God's forces and Satan's forces can be worked together. They are in opposition to each other, and God creates one thing and Satan's going to make his counterfeit. But there are so many examples through Mormonism that I could just think of off the top of my head that prove that completely false. One, starting with Adam and Eve. The traditional Christian story of Adam and Eve is like, we hate Eve. She listened to Satan, and now we're all fallen and we're in misery, and we have to get Jesus Christ to get us back and redeem us and stuff. But the Mormon narrative is that in the garden that literally existed in Jackson County, Missouri, that Adam and Eve were two literal people, and that God placed Adam and Eve in the garden and said, you can eat of any tree, of any fruit, except for this one. Don't eat of the knowledge of good and evil. That's the one I don't want you to eat from. And they're having a grand old time. And then Satan comes out, slithers out, and says, you're just going to stay in this garden forever. You'll be like gods if you could just eat this fruit, and you will know some really important stuff. You guys are just going to stay here in this garden forever. And Satan's like, you can be like the gods if you just eat this fruit. And Eve with her little hair, like showing all of the men like the most porn that they watched. I don't know, just probably all that day, but they get their fill from the temple movie where this is all reenacted in the Mormon temple on film on a big screen with Eve's hair that's like this, but just covering the tits a little bit more. She is like, Adam, come partake of the fruit. It's delicious to the taste and very desirable. We all in the Mormon realm, we all revere Eve and actually look at her as a hero, because if she didn't actually eat of the fruit, she'd be still stuck in the garden to this day, 7,000 years later. And for God's plan to progress, Eve had to eat of the fruit as tempted by Satan. That is a system that didn't have to work that way, that God set up to place Satan in the garden and allow them to be tempted, hoping that they would actually eat of the fruit and move his plan forward into motion so that he could bring about the immortality and eternal life of men, bring Elohim spirit babies that he's pumping out. Elohim and his hot spirit wives and their innumerable spirit babies needed bodies. And the only way for this plan to progress is if Eve was kicked out of the garden. And the only way for that to happen was for God to use Satan as like a subcontractor. So for Hannah to say that these forces are opposing forces, the very plan of salvation necessitates that God needed us to come down to earth to be tried and tempted. And Satan, he could just be like, okay, well, I don't want to be part of your plan at all. I could just exit with my 1/3 of the hosts of heaven. But he's like, I really needed you guys to be demons and possess bodies and stuff. Cause it's like, do you guys want to like do this play with me? And Satan's like, okay, like, will I ever win? God's like, no, of course not, but you can try. So the only way that Satan has any of the power that he has is because he is subcontracted by Elohim, by God the Father in Mormon theology. Okay. And then furthermore, in these powers are opposing God and Satan. God could never use Satan to bring about what he wants. So in Hannah's point of view, God cannot use this magic preparatory priesthood of this folk magic, this treasure digging, to bring about the restoration. When he uses Satan directly to bring about the fall, the atonement, the resurrection. He directly instructs, he directly is talking to Jesus Christ and tempting him with 40 days in the wilderness. He's directly talking to him about Job in the Bible, saying like, Job's actually not really all that hot stuff. I bet if you let me ruin his life for a little bit, he would totally forsake you and stuff. And God's like, game on, There's so many examples in Christianity and then also in Mormonism where God has to use Satan to help bring about the fall, the redemption through Jesus Christ, and the restoration through Joseph Smith. Why can't the restoration just be part of it? We know it's part of the fall, and we know that it's part of Jesus Christ's temptation. So why can't it be part of the restoration? This makes no sense, Hannah. Her whole point is, I don't think it happened, and also it's not doctrinal. It happened, and it's doctrinal. More examples? I can keep going. In the temple, you're making covenants with God in the temple, and there's a part of the movie where the actor playing Satan, and this is supposed to be played out as if it is a literal event that happened, okay? Where Adam and Eve are eating of the fruit. She's got her little hair tits, and she's like, this fruit is delicious to the taste and very desirable. And Satan's like, gotcha. And then he turns directly into your eyes of everybody who is doing their little covenants for the day and making their promises with God. And he says, anyone, he like turns slowly and he has like this jacket on. And he's like, any one of you who does not live up to the commandments that they've made in this temple at this day will be under my power. So you could just offer, like God could just offer that like eternal life. It's so great when you're in the church, you'll have a great time. But he's like, he uses Satan those are the direct words that Satan promised that he was going to get the souls of all mankind, basically saying that like, well, what we offer is eternal life. That's all fine and good. But Satan, I'm going to actually put you in the movie for when people make covenants to me, from like, the year that I restore my church all the way up to the present moment. I don't know the future, but God's like, if you could say I'm going to quote you directly in the movie and say that you're going to take their souls if they don't live up to these covenants. I could just like find a different way to punish them, but will you take their souls? You will. Thank you. That would help me out so much. This theology is all subcontracted. This God, this omniscient God, this all powerful God, it's all got a subcontractor in Satan. Furthermore, there's also examples of Joseph Smith where after he taught the word of wisdom, you look in one of my very, very favorite books, Mormonism, The Shadow of Reality by Gerald and Sandra Tanner. Yes, they have an entire section. Okay, this is a fun twofer because this is changes in censorship in the church where they went back in and said, oh, that doesn't look good. And they changed what the original context says. Mormon leaders have made many important changes to the policies and doctrine of the church because they do not want some of their people to know that such changes have taken place. They sometimes alter the church records. An example of a change in policy that caused a number of changes in Mormon records is the attitude of Mormon leaders towards the word of wisdom. The word of wisdom is a revelation given by Joseph Smith on February 27th, 1833. It forbids the use of hot drinks, alcoholic beverages, and tobacco. The Mormon writer John J. Stewart made this statement concerning the word of wisdom. No one can hold a high office of the church on even a stake or ward level, nor participate in temple work, who is a known user of tea, coffee, liquor, or tobacco. The prophet himself carefully observed the word of wisdom and insisted upon its observance by other men in high church positions, although he seems to have been quite tolerant of others' weakness in this regard. And this is from Joseph Smith, The Mormon Prophet, Salt Lake City, 1966, page 90. In spite of this statement by John J. Stewart, Joseph Smith did not keep the word of wisdom, and at times he would even invite others to obey it. In a thesis written at Brigham Young University, Gary Dean Guthrie gives the following information. Joseph tested the saints to make sure their testimonies of his religion and not of him as a personable leader. A mass alignment of the first presidency related that Joseph Smith tried the faith of the saints many times by his peculiarities. At one time, he had preached a powerful sermon on the word of wisdom, and immediately therein he rode through the streets of Nauvoo smoking a cigar. So whether or not Joseph Smith was just a hypocrite, whether he was a liar, at least at the bare minimum, he was preaching that you shouldn't take tobacco. But then he was like, but I could utilize this to teach a lesson to the saints. So if breaking the word of wisdom in the Mormon context removes the spirit of God from you, you're able to be enticed by Satan when you don't have the spirit with you, when you break that commandment. Joseph Smith himself was drinking wine. Jesus was drinking wine. Jesus was turning water to wine as a miracle. By your religion's own stories and standards, God absolutely uses satanic things, sinful things, Satan himself as an instrument to either teach his people a lesson about his might, or that he will overcome him, or that this principle is correct. And every single, all throughout history, God has subcontracted Satan in some way, all the way to Joseph Smith saying, you shouldn't smoke a cigar, but if you see me smoking a cigar, it's because I want you to be converted to the word of wisdom, and not just because I said that I did it. And you can only know if you see me smoking this really sweet, sick cigar. I just love cigars so much. They're definitely against God, but for me, God definitely doesn't like them for you, but for me.
So this is, I guess, kind of the crux of the problem, really, because then you have people coming up to the seer stone, right, and saying, hey, if Joseph Smith was using this for money digging, how was he then using it to translate, right?
Right.
So I want to know, I guess, what your take is on that.
So again, I would say, what sources do we have that Joseph Smith was using his seer stones to go and do treasure digging and get money?
Aren't there the affidavits from that one court case where he was thrown under the bus by not finding water on some guy's property?
No.
Which I totally understand
With
is a little
Josiah Stoll.
Yeah. Oh yeah, with Josiah Stoll. Just because the only reason, I'm just gonna tell you before you answer, Hannah, the only reason why I've been dubious of that is because all the time anti-Mormons are like, oh yeah, but what about that court case when he was like 16? And I'm like, yeah, if we listen to what the FBI said about Martin Luther King, like those people that were planting letters saying, oh, you should go suicide yourself before we get to you, basically.
Okay, I gotta stop it right there. So annoying. Josiah Stoll, MLK, the CIA. There's just so much there. So I don't know how else to say this, that Cardin, he's just not a smart person. He doesn't know how to take point 1 and point 2 that have vague similarities and not just think that they are like a match made in heaven together and just think he's got some slam dunk point. It's men like this that start businesses who are actually really successful because they are just not aware of their own incompetence and they just charge forward over and over again. Maybe that Jesse Smith said, maybe it's kind of like that it's like, you're either just wicked or stupid. There's not a lot in between. Josiah Stoll, who that was one of the, I think that was the last treasure digging adventure of Joseph Smith's, because then Josiah Stoll's nephew, Peter, was like, my uncle's pissing away all of this money on this freaking treasure digging. Let's go to the court and say that Joseph Smith is being a glass looker, and let's try him and get him to put an end to this so that my uncle stops wasting all his money on this. And for Cardin to compare MLK and the CIA trying to unalive him, it's just like that. Just like pissing off Josiah Stoll's family for wasting money by claiming that he had magic powers that he didn't have, being arrested. MLK and the CIA is just like that. I believe in that. The CIA is one of the most evil organizations. The CIA, if you work for the CIA and you donate to my Patreon, just press fast forward for a second. But the CIA is quite honestly one of the most evil organizations that's ever existed. And for him to compare that, yes, the CIA was doing a lot of shitty things getting with MLK. This is here's a better example, okay, Cardin? So, if you were to believe everything that the prophet Ezra Taft Benson had to say about Martin Luther King Jr., in his book, An Enemy Hath Done This, we would think MLK was just a communist and like a communist puppet trying to bring civil war and saying in the 1967 General Conference that the civil rights movement of the 60s they were living in at that present time, led by MLK, was a communist plot 6 months before MLK was killed when he said that. So if you were going to believe everything that the prophet of your church had to say about MLK, and then anybody in America, if they had like a choice to like listen to the prophet and then vote on like any legislation and like vote for legislatures who would give civil rights, if they were listening to what President Benson had to say about MLK. See, this is the comparison you should be making, is that sources of like who you're listening to, they absolutely are important. But what you just explained between Josiah Stoll getting ripped off by Joseph Smith because he didn't have magical powers like he claimed he did, and the CIA and the US government of what they tried to say and do about MLK, your church is more similar to the CIA in this equation. I just want to make that super duper clear, okay?
Examination. An examination is anyone is legal right to sue in this country. Anyone can sue me, they can sue any of us, but they have to come to court and they have to prove that they even have a legitimate case to go to trial. There's no evidence that this case ever went to trial.
Wrong.
Joseph Smith was never convicted.
Wrong.
It never even went to trial to
Wrong.
get a conviction. It was an examination. Oliver Cowdery talks about this in his letters to W.W. Phelps, which, by the way, were him responding to Mormonism Unveiled and a bunch of the other propaganda that was going on at the time. He says Joseph Smith's brought in, it's completely found unfounded, and he's let off honorably. No court documents exist to this day documenting what happened during the examination. So all of the supposed affidavits actually come decades later from anti-Mormon publications. And when you actually read those anti-Mormon publications, they say things like, Joseph Smith was convicted. Joseph Smith was found guilty.
No.
She's good.
No, she's not. She's a liar. Oh, okay, this is fun. All right, let's do it. It's going to get a little bit confusing, but I promise it. Just pay attention while I speak fast because I have to explain why what she said is so flatly false. So the Joseph Smith papers call it a trial, and reading this gives no indication that he was left off honorably. It is only Joseph Smith's right-hand man, Oliver Cowdery, best friend since he was little, basically his cousin. He's the only person out of all of the different court cases that says that he was left off honorably. And here's the kicker. This is so diabolically delicious, okay? What is this that I hold on the screen right here? This is what Hugh Nibley said, that if this was ever discovered, this would destroy the church and prove Joseph Smith to be a money digger. And we can prove its authenticity, and Hannah does not want to know that. I know she knows about this document that's been discovered. For a long time, it wasn't around. And I want to tell you the story of this because this is fascinating Mormon history. All right, I'm going to explain this court case in just a second. But in his book, The Mythmakers, Dr. Hugh Nibley has written almost 20 pages in an attempt to discredit the Bainbridge court record. On page 142 of Dr. Nibley's book, we find this statement: if this court record is authentic, it is the most damning evidence in existence against Joseph Smith. Dr. Nibley's book also states that if the authenticity of the record could be established, it would be the most devastating blow to Joseph Smith ever delivered. Additionally, Mormon scholar Francis W. Kirkman has stated that if the court record could be proven authentic, it would show that Mormonism itself is untrue. A careful study of all facts regarding this alleged confession of Joseph Smith in court of law that he had used a seer stone to find hidden treasure for purposes of fraud must come to the conclusion that no such record was ever made, and therefore it is not in existence. If any evidence had been in existence that Joseph Smith had used a seer stone for fraud and deception, and especially had he made this confession in a court of law as early as 1826 or 4 years before the Book of Mormon was printed, and this confession was in a court record, it would have been impossible for him to have organized the Restored Church. A New Witness for Christ in America, Volume 1, page 385 through 387. He goes on to say, if a court record could be identified and if it contained a confession by Joseph Smith, which revealed him to be a poor, ignorant, deluded, and superstitious person, unable himself to write a book of any consequence and whose church could not endure because it attracted only similar persons of low mentality. If such a court record confession could be identified and proven, then it follows that his believers must deny his claim divine guidance, which led them to follow him. How could he be a prophet of God, the leader of the restored church to these tens of thousands, if he had been superstitious fraud, which the pages from a book declared he confessed to be? All right. The power of Satan is flowing through me. I think we're onto something here. Let me just check in. Let's see what it says. To make pornography. Well, you guys are in luck because Dallin A. Joke said that all you have to do to be pornography is like show your shoulders. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling Satan's power right now, you guys. And then also right there, that is a photograph of the bill of Constable Philip M. DeZang. Note that the date 1826 is written at the top of the bill. The arrow points to the place where Constable DeZang tells of the serving warrant on Joseph Smith. And then on October 28th, 1971, Wesley P. Walters made an affidavit concerning the discovery of these documents. Wesley P. Walters, being the first duly sworn upon his oath, deposes and states, on Saturday, May 22nd, 1971, while in Norwich, New York, I, Wesley P. Walters of Marissa, Illinois, was shown by the county historian, Mrs. May Smith, where Chenoweth County kept their dead storage, which was a back, poorly lit room in the basement of the county jail. While looking through this material, in company with Mrs. Smith, we came across a county bill from the early 1800s. These bills were arranged in bundles by townships, and the townships bound together by years. There were bills from all of the town officials, including itemized listings of each of the local justices of the peace and itemized listings of cost of the constables who served warrants and made arrests. I realized if the bills for 1826 and 1830 for the town of Bainbridge could be located, there would doubtless be reference to two trials of Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church. I was successful in locating the bills. I came upon the first, the J.P. bill of Albert Neely, and then upon the constable's bill, Philip M. D. Zang. On Mr. Neely's bill was an item of the trial of Joseph Smith, the glass looker, on March 20th, 1826, and the cost of the county, and so on and so forth. The Tanners point out, now that Wesley P. Walters has proven beyond a doubt that the Bainbridge court record is authentic, it will be very interesting to see how the Mormon church leaders will react. As we have shown, their position in the past is that the court leaders' record is spurious. The Mormon church scholars, Franklin W. Kirtland, stated that if the court record could be proven authentic, it would show that Mormonism itself is untrue. So we have all kinds of dockets saying that Joseph Smith was arrested and that what he was charged for, who was charging him, and what the guilty verdict was. But then you're like, okay, well, let's get to what was said, what happened in the courtroom, what's going on here. And that's where the Joseph Smith Papers points out that that the entire writings of the courtroom by Justice Neely that was ripped out by his niece, that paper has been transcribed down 3 times. And they all have a little bit of different things. But the Joseph Smith Papers itself says that this looks like the most authentic one. So remember earlier when I read that article from the church's website about Joseph the seer, in one of the footnotes attached to it is this article so again, if Jesus Christ has a church and it's led by Russell M. Nelson, and the reason he's a prophet is that he got the keys all the way down the line from Joseph Smith. Russell M. Nelson is in charge. He has the discernment. According to Rod Meldrum, he's just too busy with the administration of the church. He doesn't know what's going on Jesus Christ's own website to tell people about the restoration of his church. Like, give the guy a break, okay? So just a little bit more backstory. So Joseph had been going to the Hill for 4 years. And then I think on the 5th year is when he was able to get the plates out. Before the Angel Moroni would let him take the plates, right? So from Joseph Smith's own history, from his own writing that is in our scriptures today, we have in 1827, he finally obtains the plates with these 2 new seer stone devices that are buried with the plates in the Hill, okay? But rewind. In 1824, he's treasure digging along with his own seer stone. In 1825, he's digging with the seer stone, and his reputation is getting around. And according to the Joseph Smith Papers on the LDS Church's website, that there is this docket book of the court case. And there are 3 documents that purport to be based on the docket entry of New York State versus Joseph Smith. There's a published docket entry that includes the case name, the date of the proceedings, the date of the complainant, which is Peter Bingbridge, which is Josiah Stoll's nephew. And the charge was that Joseph Smith was a disorderly person and an imposter. And also includes these detailed summaries of testimonies by Joseph Smith and 5 witnesses recounting that Joseph Smith used the seer stone while Josiah Stoll was employing him to look for this Spanish mine so that he could, get rich. So the docket entry includes with the judge Neely's purported verdict, which says, and therefore the court finds the defendant guilty. That's on the docket, and as well as the justice's itemized bill totaling $2.68. They just said this anti-Mormon charge. This is not an anti-Mormon charge. This is on the Joseph Smith papers. Okay. So in 1826, he's tried for being a glass looker. And then you have Hannah Stoddard, who's just that didn't happen. He was actually discharged honorably. The only account that he's discharged honorably and that we have ample evidence of the contrary. The only evidence is from Oliver Cowdery. So what are your sources? Who are you going to trust? There's proof that this trial happened, what the charge was, who the complainant was, that the glass looker is what he's being charged with, and that he was found guilty of it. We have the docket. It has been found. It has been confirmed that this was from this Justice Neely, okay? And we have proof that Joseph was tried for treasure digging and that he met Emma on his last treasure dig at her dad's house. And he got brought there by Josiah Stoll, and then his nephew found him out to be a fraud. They do have a trial, and that is just a weird thing to lie about. There is just ample evidence, and it's not an anti-Mormon lie. And yes, trials were different back then, but it was still called a trial. And the Joseph Smith papers lay out what kind of trial this was, and they don't skirt around the word trial. It's just a weird thing to lie about. So the Joseph Smith papers will even link you to 3 different accounts of the trial and the verdict. So one right here, Joseph Smith was never convicted in a criminal trial, with the possible exception of the 1826 trial in South Bainbridge, New York, in which he was charged with being a disorderly person. This charge was related to Joseph Smith's employment with Josiah Stoll in 1825, during which Joseph Smith used a seer stone to attempt to find buried treasure. Joseph Smith was a treasure digger. Is this point 50 yet that Joseph Smith was a treasure digger? Accounts of the trial are contradictory, various stating or suggesting that Joseph Smith was discharged, found guilty, acquitted, or allowed and encouraged to escape and leave the area. Again, from the Joseph Smith papers, sometime after the trial concluded, Justice Neely and Constable D. Zhang made bills for their service and filed them with the Chenangowan County. Don't quote me on that part. Neely's bill included the dates of the proceedings and identified Joseph Smith as the glass looker, a common phrase used to describe individuals who use seer stones. The justice defined Joseph Smith's crime only as an unspecified misdemeanor, although a later Joseph Smith history confirmed that he was arrested under disorderly person status, a misdemeanor charge. Neely indicated that his fees, You have one guy who's charging the county for serving the warrant to Joseph Smith and subpoenaing 12 witnesses for a trial, attendance with the prisoner for 2 days. He's absolutely arrested. They absolutely have a trial. And so again, the Joseph Smith papers, this is all from church sanctioned sources. I'm linked here by the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints website. This is where it gets really interesting and exciting, because I want to put on my Mormon cap and only accept sources that I would accept and that I actually think are legitimate. It doesn't even matter if the church says that they are. I want to actually get my eyes on the sources and see what they're talking about. So we have 3 printed writings of what the Justice of the Peace, Neely, wrote in his docket before his niece took the docket with her when traveling west to Utah to be a Methodist missionary. And his niece brought it with her, and it was printed 3 times. Okay. So this judge's niece takes the docket book and wants to show people about Joseph Smith's trial. And she's going out to Utah, tore the leaf out of the case for the record. So in 1872, a British journalist named Charles Marshall visits Utah, where this niece permitted him to copy down the original papers of Neely's judicial proceedings, and he published it in Fraser's magazine in England. And then another time, after she died in 1872, the excised pages passed to the Episcopal Bishop Daniel S. Tuttle, with whom she had lived in Utah. And he didn't know that it was already published in this Fraser magazine. And so he publishes it, the Religious Encyclopedia. And then finally, in 1886, the anti-Mormon Utah Christian Advocate publishes a transcript of the manuscript, as they called it, that they had obtained from Tuttle, from this Episcopalian bishop, which he lived with Neely's niece. You following? Okay. So they say in the Joseph Smith papers, each printing was apparently made independent of the others, as each contains unique omissions and errors. Without the original source, it remains unknown how accurate any of these published versions represent Neely's original docket entry. The Utah Christian Advocate is featured here, and it appears to be the most complete version of the text, capturing elements that were omitted from earlier versions. Significant variants are explained in footnotes to the transcripts. Joseph Smith, disorderly person and an impostor, prisoner brought before the court. The court, 20th of March, prisoner examined, says he came from the town of Palmyra and been at the house of Josiah Stoll in Bainbridge most of the time since. Had a small part of time since he's been employed looking for mines, but the major part has been employed by Stoll on his farm, going to school, and that he had a certain stone which he occasionally looked into to determine where hidden treasures in the bowels of the earth were. And he professed to tell in the manner where gold mines were a distance underground, and had looked for Mr. Stoll several times and informed him that he could find those treasures, and Mr. Stoll had engaged in digging for them. Joseph Smith was a treasure digger. Joseph Smith was a treasure digger, you guys. Yeah, he's a treasure digger. He's one of those guys that digs for treasures. Hate to admit it to you. One of my very favorite books on this, Joseph Smith, Making of a Prophet, by Dan Vogel. He tells this story, and it's an absolute page turner. But this is what has been written down from Justice Neely's court docket of Joseph Smith having this skill that he could look through this stone, and Josiah Stoll really believing that he had this power. If you want to read this yourself, you can pause and read. And just goes over and over that Joseph Smith emphatically stated that he had this stone and this power, and then Joseph Smith basically was like, he knows that he's been caught. He knows that he needs to get over this. He's already like hot and heavy with, with Emma over here, and he's ready to give this up. And Joseph Smith says, like, it's really starting to hurt my eyes, and I'm thinking about trying out some other stuff. It's the times be a catching up with him. And so this is on the Joseph Smith papers. I know it's an old-timey handwriting, but on the right, it has people who can read old-timey handwriting, people who work for the LDS Church. Joseph Smith, the glass looker. And then at the end of it, it says, as evidenced of the fact prisoner looked into his hat to tell him about some money witness lost 16 years ago, and therefore the court fined the defendant guilty. Cost warrant, 19 cents.
Are real. I have seen them in my life, and I've experienced the power of God enough to know that there is a difference between the power of God and the power of the devil. And anyone who pays the price to have those experiences knows they are very different. They're in opposition to each other, and you cannot blend the two. So when I say, if Joseph Smith is blending the two, then I'm saying he is someone who doesn't even have the same understanding of God that I do.
So I do think there is room for there to be magic present in Joseph Smith's life. For
like
example,
middle class magic, you're saying, not like devil, you know what I'm saying? Like, okay.
Hannah's seething. She's like,
I think you raised a lot of really good points, and you're able to deliver them in a way that's very, very convincing.
Yes.
I feel like a bad person if I disagree with you.
The standard to which the Old Testament prophets are the standard to be an Old Testament prophet allows for more magic than we often allow for Joseph Smith.
So is that magic or is that priesthood? Like, I think what terms we use are really, really important.
Yeah, that's the quote of her saying, and she goes on to say that, and then they were like, well, what about when the church was restored? I think that's the clip that I meant to put in earlier. But yeah, so then Hannah goes on to say that these two things cannot be mixed. And Kuwait goes over here talking about like, well, the magic's cool. And like, what about the magic that dates back like all the way to Abraham? And she's like, no, you mean priesthood? And like, you can tell that like she's like fiery and not in the fun NuanceHoe way. I'm a little bit scared of her. It's like, okay, calm down here. And just like they're pushing back gently. She has like that older sister energy that I just cower underneath, except for when they're completely wrong and I am completely right. Yeah, so it's just really interesting to see the different factions of this traditionalist view of Mormonism. And it's just so interesting. Going back to their point, can God bring about his work and his glory through things that are of the devil, that are satanic? And to her, it's an absolute 1000% no. And she's on a show called Midnight Mormons. President Russell M. Nelson said that to say the word Mormon offends God and is a win for Satan. She is on a show that is its title, Donate to Midnight Mormons, flashing in your face. Everything around her all says Mormon. It all says Satan, 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 all according to the prophet that she sustains. But again, that's just like the young punk version of Mormonism. Midnight Mormons comes in here and they're like, we don't want to follow the rules, you know? Like, I've read Hannah's book. I know what she believes, that you have Kwaku and he's done these videos for Fair Mormon with this new Mormon history that she absolutely despises and thinks is completely only exists because of these satanic influences worming their way into Mormonism. And she's on this mainstream show with a Mormon all over Midnight Mormons. It's flashing in front of her face. That is a win for Satan, one thing. And then she's also using, by her own standards, she is trying to forward what she believes is what God wants about the true church through things that all have win for Satan all over them. Like, that's just another funny irony that I like. I doubt that these guys actually know how insanely fundamentalist she is. And I also saw another comment where somebody said, I bet you guys were casting lots about who got to ask out Hannah for her number afterwards. And they replied, and they're like, yeah, that's a good idea. Now, listen, I know a thing or two about Hannah Stoddard, and one, I know that she's saving her first kiss for her wedding day. And that's a lovely thing. And for one thing, I know about those three men did not save their first kiss for their wedding day. Kwaku puts on parties for a living with people soberly grinding on one another. And Hannah goes home to practice braiding hair and gaslighting her mom.
Right. But I mean, by this logic, is it the power of God going back to Abraham's day? Is it the power of God to sacrifice an animal for blessings? Or is that a pagan practice that God had to redeem through his son? Because Abraham seems to know, hey, sacrifice your son Isaac. I mean, we know that is not the practice that God wants, but that was a pagan practice. And perhaps, I mean, you could say it was a satanic practice, because that is how they made offerings to their foreign gods, but that was still used in a way for good through the Lord. So could not these rituals,
she's seething, she's like
either neutral or the dark powers, be redeemed in a way that God can use?
Okay, so we have to make sure we're getting all of our history right. Like when Abraham takes Isaac up on the altar, he is completely a follower of Jehovah at that point.
Of course.
This is not Abraham pagan who then becomes a follower of Jehovah after sacrifice.
I understand that.
And Kwaku absolutely makes this less than rational case, but it's still plausible. And Hannah's like, no. When Abraham did that, when he was going up to the mountain to go sacrifice Isaac, he was doing that for Christ, for Jehovah. So, fun fact, in Mormonism, the Godhead is three separate beings, okay? So you have Elohim, God the Father, who was once a man who achieved exaltation or godhood. And he lives on a star near the planet Kolob, which is revealed by Joseph Smith. So that had to happen. This is all part of the Mormon lore, the Mormon theology, so stick with me. So Elohim, he has a body, and then Jehovah, his only begotten son and savior who died on the cross to redeem mankind, you know the guy. So since he's been resurrected, he went back to Kolob, and he dwells up there with Elohim and the Holy Ghost, who doesn't have a body, but they all work together in purpose, but three separate beings. And Jehovah, aka Jesus Christ, who is the God of the Old Testament. Because sometimes it really is important to clarify this, because a lot of people are like, when they think of Jesus Christ, it's like, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. And then other times he's like, when you go into your enemies' villages, I want you to smash the babies' heads against rocks, Old Testament God stuff. But Jehovah, aka Jesus Christ, he's the God of this world who works under the direction of God the Father. So when Hannah says Abraham knew Jehovah, and she wants to complain all throughout this video about like sources and like who can trust first, second, fourth hand accounts. She doesn't even take into account that Jehovah is just the development of the name Yahweh. The very God that you're talking about, the very story of Abraham is so old and has gone through so many different layers of belief that the God in Mormonism that you now worship in this Rocky Mountain Bible fan fiction sex cult, it's important to understand that we can understand the Bible and then you add your Mormon theology onto it. These things, they come together. So I just think this is interesting to just point this out. Like there's so many absurdities. And I just think if you can't even nail down what the nature of God is, remix it from all the way back to like Canaanite pantheons of gods, like you have a problem. You're trying to mix too many different superstitions together to create a theology that works for yourself, where you're like, we're the original one. So if Jehovah is the name, that's just the different name from Yahweh, which is like believed to have occurred during the Middle Ages when Christian scholars attempted to translate the Hebrew name into Latin letters. And then Yahweh was part of the Canaanite pantheon of gods. And as the Israelites slowly moved from this polytheism to a monotheism, where even in our scriptures and Mormon scriptures to this day, you can open up, the Christian Bible, you can open up a Mormon Bible. And in it to this day, you have the Old Testament Jehovah, who being God, knows that he is one of many gods being worshipped. You can ask any biblical scholar though, that like the way that God was writing about himself, he's strangely really jealous, like as if it's not written by an all-knowing God, but by people who think kind of like warmongering psychopaths. It like kind of makes you think, And so Abraham, she's saying, knew Jehovah, and there's no funny business going on. And you just have to think through this through a couple steps. So Jehovah is just our modern name for Yahweh, who according to the original beliefs of the Hebrews was one of 70 sons of the chief god El Elyon, and that's in the Quran, and it's confirmed by the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's in Deuteronomy 32:8, where it explains that the Most High God El Elyon divided up the nations to his dozens of sons, and Yahweh gets Israel. Cha-ching! And all of this time, there's this belief in this henotheism, which means like the worship of one big daddy god, one big national god, and but they also like low-key recognize that other nations have their own god. And it's literally not until all the way in freaking Isaiah 44:6, where you get the first hard and fast statement from God, where he's like, hey, just checking in, I'm the only God. All right, everyone cool with that? First, last, you're talking to him. So the very Jehovah that Abraham knows is a Yahweh that developed over a long period of pantheistic God worship, which lore in a Mormon's mind, they don't even believe that. They don't accept anything of what I just said, that the Jehovah and that Mormons worship is Elohim's son from a totally different theological origin story of the one of being in the war in heaven and like who had the better plan, Lucifer, like, and Jesus Christ coming down to die and achieve the atonement, right? Because funnily enough, blood sacrifices are a thing that both Mormons and Jews and Christians and Muslims, all of their gods actually really get off on. So that is one convenient, cohesive, bloodthirsty nature of God.
But the idea of sacrificing an animal for blessings from your God, everyone did that. That is
it started with Adam and Eve in the Book of Moses.
That real couple 7,000 years ago that you have to believe in if you're Mormon.
Awesome.
I won't open that door because that's a little controversial.
Well, I was about to say, looks like we got another podcast coming up.
Can't wait. So if that's an own, if you are team traditionalist, Mormon, young earth creationist, and that is an own for you, of like, no, it wasn't a pagan practice because the earth is only 7,000 years old and the first people were Adam and Eve and they had to invent it. If that's like the way that you own people is by bringing in like young earth creationist logic, that's how you slam dunk on people when they have opposing points of view. Because to be honest, like Hannah's saying that, yeah, these two things can't be mixed, and Quake is talking about all of this magic dating back to Abraham. And like to him, that's kind of cool and stuff. And like I said, she's seething because she thinks that everything that Kwaku honestly says, all of his retorts, all of the apologetics that he uses is based on this new Mormon history that she thinks is quite literally corrupted by Satan. And so she's probably seething more than you even realize. Like, you have to read her book to understand more of her philosophies. But if Quake is nuancing this, like, what about all this magic that's dating back to Abraham and these pagan practices? Can God not redeem these things? But Quaco brings up, what if Joseph was using the stone and dictating the words off of them? And I just think Candle is probably going crazy in her head, because she doesn't believe that's how the Book of Mormon was even translated or produced whatsoever, that there wasn't a rock that he treasured dug with, that there wasn't a rock that he looked out of a hat to see the words appear. And Quaco loves that kind of magic stuff. His This Is the Show, his tits videos that he made for Fair Mormon that I couldn't believe were allowed or posted. I just cannot believe the level of oversight that didn't exist on those. Or he's like, if you believe that like a glowing angel could travel through space and time and appear and retrieve these, it's like, you already believe in all of this mythical shit. Like, why can't you just suspend your belief like a couple more times, you know? Like, that's the logic that so many Mormons usually use, is just, you already suspend your logic in like 55 other ways to even believe in God and the Bible and half of Mormonism already. If you're having doubts, just keep suspending your belief and just keep going with this lack of critical thinking. And she doesn't believe the narratives that the people at Midnight Mormons believe. She has the traditionalist narrative. Well, they definitely have the progressive one.
This is 1987. This is a few years after Richard Bushman comes out with Joseph Smith and the Beginnings of Mormonism. And the new Mormon history that we talked about in the other interview with Leonard Arrington is picking up. This is what he says. This is in the Ensign, November 1987 General Conference. Gordon B. Hinckley says, another phenomenon is described as the writing of a new history of the church, as distinguished from the old history. So what is he talking about here? He's talking about the new Mormon history that we've been talking about. It represents, among other things, an effort to ferret out every element of folk magic and the occult in the environment in which Joseph Smith lived, to explain what he did and why. Sounds like Ref Stonerling? Yes. And other sources. I have no doubt, Gordon B. Hinckley says, there was folk magic practiced in those days. Without question, there were superstitions and the superstitious. I suppose there was some of this in the days when the Savior walked the earth. There's even some in this age of so-called enlightenment. The fact that there were superstitions among the people in the days of Joseph Smith is no evidence whatever that the church came of such superstition. So again, Gordon B. Hinckley was involved in the committee with the leaders that shut down Richard Bushman's book when it was going to be published by the church, and then the subsequent centennial history. Like, debate has been going on for a long time. Joseph F. Smith publicly said Joseph Smith was no treasure digger. That's coming from Joseph Smith's nephew. Again, this is the family around the time saying these are lies. Joseph F. Smith said this was all done to slander him. So again, just to kind of sum up, we've been talking about the history, but the reason why I believe it matters is, again, because if you've got the power of God and you've got an opposing power, everything Satan does is to mimic or mock Jesus Christ. Everything. He uses the cross. You study Satanism, they have a Bible, they have a priesthood, they have robes, they have ceremonies, but it's all twisted. And so the reason why I think it matters is because if you start graying the lines, we have an entire generation of youth today who can't tell the difference between Harry Potter and the power of God. And the reason why that is serious is because we live in one of the most deceptive ages. More than ever before, we need to be able to understand how to discern a true spirit from a false spirit. Look at all the people like the Chad Daybells and the Lori Vallows, and they all go down this line where they can't tell the difference. And it's like, oh, it doesn't matter. We got portals. Joseph Smith had portals. I have portals. I've got this. I've got that, right? And they can't tell the difference between the two. We need to be able to exercise discernment to be able to tell, because it does matter. And the power of God and the priesthood is completely different than the power of the devil. Sorry.
Okay. We got our heart out. That's awesome. Her name is Hannah Stoddard. The group is, the website is ldsanswers.org.
Oh, Michelle Stone just texted me. She says, I want to box her. So I guess.
No, yeah, that's funny. This is Midnight Mormons. See you guys on the next program.
See you guys on the next program. Can't wait. Yeah, definitely the comments are like, can't wait to have her back. The ex-Mormons, they're going to be in here screaming that Joseph Smith was a treasure digger and she's just like a total powerhouse. I'd love to see her debate. All of you people said that in the Midnight Mormons comment section. Again, just pick your player. If you need a young earth creationist tell you that if Joseph Smith said that he is on the right hand of God, and that's what he said, that's what happened. And everything else that doesn't correlate with what's revealed by the prophets is satanically inspired. If that's the narrative that you're going with, good luck in life. I wish you well. But to her point that, yes, has there been a breakaway, a faction of this traditionalist version of the history that is not true, that is ignoring all of the facts that I've stated in this video? Does that exist? Is she part of it? Yes. Are there prophets in the church who have tried to ignore it? Yes. Yes, they have an entire section, Embarrassed Over the Stone. And there's so much information in here about how they would be embarrassed over the stone, because this is folk magic, and it does call into question Joseph's credibility if he's using this method of fraud to in all of his years when he's supposed to be traveling back and forth to the hill and getting ready to receive the golden plates, and he's defrauding farmers out of their money 18 times on these illegal treasure digs, and he's taken to court over it and told to scram, boy. Yeah, that does call into question Joseph Smith's credibility. So it's just nicer to think of him as a nice Christian boy who was just wondering where's the true church, and he's just twiddling his thumbs reading James 1:5 until Moroni shows up in his bedroom. That's a really nice story, but it's not a true story. But if you want to be a Mormon fundamentalist who just holds really tight to this idea, you'll find people, you'll find a conference, you'll find Rod Meldrum, and you'll find people who want to say that the earth is 7,000 years old and that homosexuality is just from people rebelling against God, the exact same as people who want to diddle kids and F goats. So you will definitely find your tribe. You'll find your home with Hannah and Rod and Russ Barlow. And you can go road trip to the Grand Canyon and see Creation Rock right next to Flood Rock, because the things, again, that Hannah's saying here, they all have to link together for the traditionalist view. The only reason you would say Joseph Smith is a treasure digger is because you have fallen victim to the counterfeit of Satan, and who he's apparently allowed to infiltrate the CES department of the LDS Church, all the way up to the Howard W. Hunter, who called Leonard Arrington to, be the church historian and hold these different offices, are all held by people, at least in this traditionalist faction, who don't have the discernment to know when they're going to employ people in the church who are going to lead millions into faith crisis and lead them away from their covenants and stuff. But as Rod Meldrum explained in my interview with him, God just loves free agency. He just lets people really do their own thing, all the way to the point where he's just like, God's like, I just am busy. I just got things I got to do. I can't be telling you, do this, do that. Like Rod Meldrum's like, God can't be like, do this now, do that. Like, that's not free agency. I think he's really confused the concept of free agency. I think Rod and Hannah and people like this have really confused the idea of what the mantle of authority of a prophet is supposed to be versus like what God intended for free agency. Because you're going to have to make a case that free agency means that you can listen to your church leaders say, Joseph Smith restored the Book of Mormon like this with a rock in his hat. And you can listen to your church leaders say, and he went on these illegal treasure digs, but it was all just a preparatory gospel. And that all of that has all come through this satanic counterfeit that is actually not what happened. God wants you to know his character. He wants you to know you're a child of God and wants you to be able to live with him again. But he's really fuzzy on getting any details about how to do that, and is really interested in giving you lots of contradictory information about it. So he's fine with, as long you're in the true church, a fraction of a percent of all of God's children. Congratulations. Now the test really begins that you're in the church. If you listen to the prophets too closely and what they say about my nature as God and how when I want to establish a church, how I do that, if I do it in methods that look like the occult and satanic stuff, how are you going to feel about it? Are you going to get nervous? Tell me honestly. Like, I'm sending you down to earth, but I want to make the test really hard. You'll be in the one true church. I just wanted to do it like on hard mode for you. So I wanted my prophets to tell you incorrect information about me. Am I bad? But if any of it is unclear at all whatsoever, and you feel like there's some contradictions going on and you decide to leave the church, I will place you under the power of Satan. It would actually have been better if you wouldn't have known the gospel, because you're not just going to the celestial kingdom, the lowest one that most people would actually kill themselves to get to. It's going to be really nice. I'm actually going to send you to outer darkness, and you're going to be called a son of perdition. So it's tough. I'm not saying it's easy, but you can always pray to me in my house called a temple, as long as you live close enough and have the free time and can pay 10% of your income and don't touch your genitals. I know I gave you your own amusement park, but again, the test is going to be hard. I didn't say it was going to be easy. But in this section, embarrassed over a stone, there's so much good stuff in this book. And the Tanner's right. The fact that Joseph Smith used a stone, which he placed in a hat to translate the Book of Mormon, has caused a great deal of embarrassment because it so closely resembles crystal hazing. Crystal hazing is an ancient practice, and crystal gazers have claimed to see writings in their stones in the same way that Joseph Smith was supposed to have translated the Book of Mormon. It's going to be confusing. Some things are going to be Satan, and the exact same thing that I'm going to have my prophets do are going to be godly. If you get it wrong, you'll just go to hell. It's really important to get this right, okay? Crystal's bad, stone in a hat, good. Then the Standards are going to say, Mormon apologists have a difficult time explaining the fact that Joseph Smith used a seer stone. The Mormon apostle John A. Wistow made this statement. Some use was made also of the seer stone. The occasional mention was made of it. This was a stone found while the prophet assisted in digging a well for Clark Chase. Not a big deal. It's just the witch family. By divine power, this stone was made serviceable by Joseph Smith in the early part of his ministry. There's no evidence that this stone was used in Joseph's sacred work. Joseph Smith's seeker after truth. End quote. So then the Tanner is going to say, notice that the apostle Wistow states that there's no evidence that the stone was used in Joseph's sacred work. Yet on page 260 of the same book, Wistow states that Joseph did use the stone in his spiritual work. Quote, before Joseph received the Urim and Thummim, that's the Nephite interpreters that was in the box of the golden plates, he had a stone obtained during the digging of a well for Clark Chase. This stone, through the blessing of the Lord, became a seer stone, which was used frequently by him in his spiritual work. Just don't quote me on stuff I already said earlier in this book. Gosh, what am I supposed to be? A special witness for Jesus Christ who actually knows what I'm talking about? The use of the seer stone explains, in part, the charge against Joseph that he was a peepstone gazer. The use of the stone and the Urim and Thummim was well known to the people of his time and neighborhood. The use of stones in sacred work has been frequent. For example, the ball of the Leahona, the rod of Aaron, the 12 stones of Lehi. Again, you already believe in all those things that we just listed, so just suspend your disbelief for Joseph's ones that are oddly similar to, occulty Satan ones. Then that's end quote that. And then the Tanner's going to say, Joseph Fielding Smith seemed to be embarrassed over the use of the stone. Although he admits that Joseph Smith had a stone, he was unwilling to admit that he used it for the translation of the Book of Mormon. He's like, peep stones. Yeah, maybe he had it. We don't know that he used it for the Book of Mormon. But then he does go on to admit, on page 225 of his book, Doctrines of Salvation, Joseph Fielding Smith said, the Urim and Thummim so spoken of, however, was the seer stone, which was in the possession of the prophet Joseph Smith in the early days. The seer stone is now in the possession of the church. So he's admitting that there's two separate things, the Urim and Thummim and the seer stones, and they're in the possession of the church. You can check out the church's website because now they admit it. So he knew that it was there. He was the church historian for a long enough time. He knows what's in them vaults, and he knows that there's contradicting stories of the first vision that he decided to hide for 50 years as well. So he's part of that traditionalist narrative. But yeah, some people are just not into admitting when true things are true. Thanks so much for sticking with me. I really feel like the satanic influences floating through my body right now. So I actually have one more. It says, drink alcohol and do some gay shit. Okay. All right. Well, as an agent of Satan, I'll try my best. I am straight, so I'm having a difficulty thinking of what I could do for gay shit. You know what? Actually, I can actually be my own pornography. Nice. Actually, no, better than that. If you guys remember, my old friend, my bud, Matt Easton, look how cute he is. This is not an ad for 5 Husbands, vodka. As an agent for Satan, I will absolutely show you how much fun drinking is if you haven't tried it yet. I really love the taste. I don't make a face or anything. It's something I quite enjoy. Obviously, as an agent for Satan, it's really important that you see how much fun I'm having with this alcohol, and you also want to partake. So supporting my bud Matt Easton, who came out during his valedictorian speech at BYU. Now, I'm not at all trying to hesitate at drinking this again as an agent for Satan. I really love it. As an agent for Satan, obviously, this is my favorite drink, and I encourage all Mormons to drink it as well. So down the hatch, here it goes. Yum, 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 yum. That's good. Delicious alcohol. I really like that. My satanic device, the same one that Joseph Smith used to bring about satanic things, is also communicating to me that it wants you to tip NuanceHoe over at the NuanceHoe Patreon. That's where she puts all of her pornography. Satan has the attitude of like a set decorator who gets upset if he went all the time to prep things that didn't get used during the show. So if you're wondering if the NuanceHoe loves the sweet, sweet taste of nicotine and tobacco, you found the right girl. She loves them. And another thing she likes to do is you get travel over to the NuanceHoe Patreon. You can tip a couple dollars a month, and that's what her pornography is. And you'll see her with playing cards, and she puts them right over her titties like this. What a magic spell. She's a joker and an ace at the same time. You might be thinking, does she put all of her YouTube videos up ad-free on her Patreon and also in podcast form? Well, it's your lucky day, kid. And you can keep these videos coming and these cigarettes lightened, because it's not that she just asked for the cigarette from the man outside of the 7-Eleven down the street from her estranged husband's apartment. No, y'all NuanceHoe, she loves the cigarettes. She loves that smooth taste of nicotine and tobacco. She loves it so much. And it's at this point in this bit that she needs to clarify for her mom, who is hopefully not watching anymore, but maybe she got a better understanding, that she feels like she needs to clarify for her old mom that this is just a joke. And she realized the day that her mom told her that even though all she did was just have a baby and left the Mormon church, that her mom was going to tell her continually every day that she's a bitter tree that bears bitter fruits, and there's nothing she could ever do to win her back, so she might as well scare her. The old NuanceHoe, she disappointed her mom long ago, but she said, "Ma, I'm going to be somebody. You're going to see my name in lights one day, Ma. It's going to be big. I'm going to the big city, Salt Lake. You're going to see my name in lights, Ma. I'm going to be a somebody." Well, that's all for my video today, everyone. If you notice that I put a lot of research and time into this video, the old NuanceHoe, she's getting older. She's getting wiser. If you also want me to be a somebody, make sure that you like and comment for the algorithm. Anyway, come back in a few days or a few weeks. I'm doing an entire response video with John DeLynn to the traditionalist view that Hannah and her dad describe here, this Firm Foundation section. I told John DeLynn today before I made this video, holy shit, dude, we should have read this book before we talked to the old kook Rod Meldrum. I could have sat back cool, calm, and casual if I had understood what she describes in this book. I was just a girl who had a dream of being a somebody. Can anybody hold that against me? Like, comment, subscribe. Go over to my links and give me a little tip if you like this video and you appreciate what I did. And keep the change, you filthy animal. Hey, thanks for watching that video. If you want to see me keep making long-form YouTube videos on Mormon topics from deconstruction to Mormon history, please consider helping make my channel sustainable by heading to DonorBox for a one-time or reoccurring donation, or Patreon or Venmo. Like and subscribe, and hit me up on Instagram if there's a topic you'd like me to cover next, and I promise to keep rolling out awesome content weekly. If you want me to go away, do nothing.